LoveLore Library. Chapter 1418. According to Hua Baoyue, she didn't travel to the historical time and space, nor was it Earth, but another world. There were countless galaxies in the universe, and not only Earth had life. This was a fact that everyone knew. Hua Baoyue had been studying Earth's history all these years. He had traveled countless times with the reincarnation disc, and he had even been to the era when Earth was just formed. It could be said that no one knew Earth's history better than him, including those that had no written records and those that had been drowned by history. He might not know the specific events of each period, but he knew the outline of Earth's continents in each period. He had never seen the shape of the continent that Ning Xuemo mentioned on Earth. Not in any period. So the place she traveled to should be a planet in outer space similar to Earth, or even beyond any galaxy he knew. It was a system of its own. Gods and immortals had nothing to do with this world. There was even more than one celestial emperor. It had nothing to do with the world here. Ning Xuemo listened to him and was stunned for a moment. She couldn't believe it. No way. Although the structure of the continent there is different from the one here, I can see the sun, the moon, and the stars. They even speak Chinese. If it's not Earth, it can't be so similar. Hua Baoyue was also thinking. Have you heard of the mirror world? Ah. Ning Xuemo was confused. Hua Baoyue sighed. Legend has it that everything in this world comes in pairs. It's the same for planets. If there is an Earth, there will be a pseudo-Earth that is extremely similar to it, just like what you see in a mirror. But they don't appear in the same place, but in two different spaces. These two spaces are not connected, and you won't see them in the starry sky. They don't even know each other's existence. Occasionally, there will be a huge change in the magnetic field, and a passage will appear between the two spaces, such as a whirlpool, a black hole, etc. Once it appears, it will suck away things that happen to appear nearby. This way, things in one space will be sucked into another space. Hua Baoyue seemed to have studied a lot about the starry sky. The two ladies present were a little confused. Bai Yun heard this and asked directly, Brother Hua, you're not fooling us, are you? You said Sister Ning traveled to the mirror. Hua Baoyue touched her chin and said, Wrong, it's the mirror world, not the mirror. I didn't believe it at first, but after seeing what happened to her, I believe it. His gaze returned to Ning Xuemo's face. Miss Ning, did you discover anything strange when you were searching for the spatial door? Ning Xuemo thought for a while. She vaguely remembered that when she left the planet where her previous body was sealed, the sky seemed to have suddenly darkened when she flew into the sky. However, she was distracted at that time and did not notice it. Later, she accidentally saw a meteorite belt and stopped to scatter the ashes. Then, she fell into a trance. When he came to his senses, he realized that everything had changed. Could it be that he had inadvertently returned to the space that belonged to this side at that time, and then found a spatial door to return to his own era? Although Hua Baoyue's explanation was unimaginable, it did not seem to be implausible. Besides, Ning Xuemo's main concern wasn't this, but another problem. Chapter 1419. Mr. Hua, can I go back through your reincarnation disc? Hua Baoyue looked at her with his peach blossom eyes and answered, extremely difficult. Ning Xuemo was speechless. Then the original contract was for nothing. She didn't give up. Then there should be hope, right? Hua Baoyue seemed to be in a difficult position. He stood up and walked around the room. Bai Yun had known him for many years, but this was the first time she saw him so serious. She was drinking tea leisurely, but now she stopped drinking. Her eyes followed him and she couldn't help but ask, how difficult is it? Hua Baoyue didn't answer her. Instead, he turned to Ning Xuemo. I advise you to give up on this idea. I'm not doing this business. Ning Xuema was speechless. Her face was slightly pale. She took a breath and asked, why? Hua Baoyue said, my reincarnation disc can only go through the different eras on Earth. It can't go through the mirror world. You can't go back. Can't go back. She couldn't go back. Ning Xuema's fingers were cold. Shenjiuli's shadow appeared in her mind. Were they really not meant to be together? She would never be able to see him again. No. Impossible. There must be a way. She looked at Hua Baoyue. Mr. Hua, you said it was extremely difficult, but it doesn't mean there is no hope, right? Hua Baoyue didn't look at her anymore. He walked away. No, there is no hope. You'd better give up. She turned around and disappeared. Ning Xuema was speechless. She sat down slowly and didn't say a word. Bai Yun didn't expect Hua Baoyue to leave so quickly. She was also stunned. After thinking for a while, she comforted Ning Xuema. Xuema, actually, you don't have to go back to that era. Think about it, that era was so backward. They had old-fashioned thinking, polygamy, no heating in winter, no air conditioning in summer. She talked a lot about the disadvantages of that era. Ning Xuema closed her eyes slightly. Her heart was bitter. She was never interested in that era. When she first transmigrated there, she tried every possible way to escape. Even in her dreams, she wanted to return to her own era. However, ever since she met that person and fell in love with him, she had already treated him as her home. Wherever he was, that was where her heart belonged. So, she loved him to this extent. So, he was already so deep in the mud that he couldn't escape unscathed. Shenjiuli, Shenjiuli. Do you miss me too? Could it be? You don't even know I'm pregnant with your child. In order to give Ning Xuema some relief, Bai Yun simply took her out to play. Shopping, dancing, karaoke, shopping, watching movies. As long as the girl was interested in something, she would bring her to play and shop. He wanted her to experience the benefits of living in modern times and not think about that backward place. From time to time, he would advise her to learn to look forward, to learn to follow fate, and to cherish the present. What was love? Who in modern times still believed in love? What was the 7-year itch for people who loved each other so much before marriage? There were plenty of people who loved each other so much before marriage and fought until their heads bled after marriage. What was the point of thinking about an ancient man? No matter how good an ancient man was, he was still an ancient man. The feudal thinking in his bones wouldn't change. In short, he kept telling her the benefits of staying in modern times and the inconvenience of returning to that ancient era. Chapter 14:20. Finally, she thought of a ruthless advice. Xuema, think about it. You are pregnant now. Giving birth to a baby in ancient times was a deadly thing. If you are not careful, you will have a difficult labor. If you are not careful, you will lose your life. Unlike here, where science is so advanced, if the baby does not go well, you can still have a C-section. Bai Yun was very enthusiastic, and it was indeed for her own good. Ning Xuema understood all these. She also understood all these reasons, but her heart was like a string, and the other end of the string was in Shenjiuli's hands. No matter where she flew, her heart was still controlled by him. If it was in the past, she would definitely persuade him to let go. It was not easy to find a two-legged toad in this world, but there were plenty of two-legged men. She also felt that she was too unrestrained, and not like her character in the past. Shenjiuli still misunderstood her. Shenjiuli even hurt her. Shenjiuli even cooked her. She desperately thought of all the bad things about him, and all the things that he had done wrong to her. However, she still could not let go. She must have been poisoned by his venomous spell, it must be. She thought about it for 2 days, and the more she thought about it, the more unwilling she felt. Therefore, she still had to find a way to go back. She still had to find him. He was the only one who could cure this venomous spell. Otherwise, she was afraid that she would not be able to rest in peace for the rest of her life. Since the reincarnation disc was not working, she would try another way. After all, this was how she came back. Maybe she could use the same method to go back. Bai Yun, I must go back, no matter what the price. Ning Xuema said this and turned to leave. From then on, Ning Xuema searched the sky again, looking for the space-time door. She was flying very fast now. In a month, she had almost gone to all the areas on Earth that were said to have space-time doors. But there was none. She did not know if it was because there were too few space-time doors in this era, or the method she was looking for was wrong. In short, she did not find anything in a month. The world was long, and the sea of people was vast. They were in this world, and they were still alive in this world. However, she could not find him, nor could she find the way home. The seawater below was churning, and seabirds were flying in the sky. Ning Xuema floated in the air, her heart cold. This was the last place she knew she had to look for, but she still couldn't find it. She had always been strong and did not shed tears easily. But now, she cried as she looked at the setting sun in the sky. She cried like a lost child. These days, the baby in her belly probably knew that she was not in a good mood and did not dare to disturb her, so it had been staying there quietly. Occasionally, when Ning Xuema stroked it, it moved a little to show that it was fine. Other times, it was almost motionless, even more obedient than a chick in its eggshell. Ning Xuema had been depressed for the past few days, but she couldn't find a way to vent her feelings. Now that she had started crying, she could no longer hold it in. Anyway, this was a no man's land, and no one was here to watch her, so she simply let go of her tears. Shinjioli, you bastard. Shinjioli, I miss you. Shinjioli, why didn't you come to me? Aren't you an omnipotent god? Why didn't you guess that I couldn't go back? Why didn't you come to pick me up? I can't go back. She cried loudly, sobbing so hard that she could not speak. She cried until her head was dizzy, and she cried until she could not find her bearings. Why are you so stubborn? A voice suddenly sounded not far behind her. Chapter 14:21. Why are you so persistent? A voice suddenly sounded not far behind her. The voice was magnetic, pleasant, and very familiar. Ning Xuema was shocked and turned around. A man was standing behind her. He was wearing a white robe and had silver hair. His face was handsome, and his peach blossom eyes were glittering. Hua Baoyue. He was not wearing modern clothes today, but an ancient white robe. His hair was also tied up in an ancient style. He raised his hand and threw a pack of tissue to her. Come, wipe your face first. No matter how beautiful a woman is, she doesn't look good when she cries. Ning Xuema rarely cried freely. She didn't expect to fall into this person's eyes. She was a little embarrassed and took the tissue without hesitation. She wiped her face and adjusted her mood while she was at it. Hua Baoyue didn't say anything. He crossed his arms and looked at the sunset patiently. When a girl cried, you either coaxed her or didn't look at her. You just couldn't stare at her. Are you really a fox immortal? Ning Xuema quickly adjusted. She didn't want anyone to see her crying and her weakness, including this charlatan-like exorcist in front of her. Hua Baoyue was also happy. His body flashed with white light, and 9 foxtails appeared, swaying behind him. 9-tailed fox. He was also a 9-tailed fox. Ning Xuema remembered her previous life. Snowy Mo was also a 9-tailed silver fox, but in order to win the position of the Demon Lord, she changed her skin to red. you're a demon. Can a demon be an exorcist? Thanks to her previous life, Ning Xuema felt that nine-tailed foxes should be demons or demons. Hua Baoyue raised his eyebrows. Demon? You think I have a demon aura? Ning Xuema shook her head. No. She felt that he had an immortal aura. Hua Baoyue nodded with satisfaction, his peach blossom eyes shining. That's it. I'm a nine-tailed fairy fox. I'm an immortal. They were both nine-tailed foxes, but why was the difference so big? Ning Xuema couldn't help but sigh for her previous life. If Snowy Imo could also cultivate, how could there be such a mess later? Of course, Ning Xuema wouldn't exist either. Ning Xuema looked at Hua Baoyue from head to toe. She did not expect that there would be immortals living in this era, among the masses. After figuring out Hua Baoyue's identity, Ning Xuema no longer treated Hua Baoyue as a scammer. Have you been following me recently? Hua Baoyue did not answer her question. Instead, she sighed and said, I have a bad habit. I can't bear to see those who are infatuated. Ning Xuema looked at him without saying anything. Hua Baoyue looked at the setting sun again. Besides, that girl Bai Yun is very obsessed with your house. I owe her a favor, so I had to come out and find you. Ning Xuema's heart skipped a beat, and her eyes lit up. So, you have a way. There is a way, but it's extremely dangerous. I don't recommend it. Hua Baoyue finally turned around, his handsome face serious. The success rate is only 1%. If it doesn't work, you won't be able to go back to the place you want to go, and you won't be able to come back to this world. Maybe you'll become a piece of cosmic dust, and you won't even be able to reincarnate. Ning Xuema was speechless. Hua Baoyue sighed. That's why I said there was no way. I wanted you to completely give up this idea, but I didn't expect you to be so persistent, looking everywhere for the space door. The space door in this world is mostly turbulent. Not to mention that you can't find it, even if you find it, you can't blindly barge in. Because many of them are standard dead places. Once you enter, you won't even leave a whole body behind. Chapter 1422. Ning Xuema pursed her lips and smiled bitterly in her heart. She was from this world, but she knew nothing about the secret rules of this world. Hua Baoyue asked her, there are two paths in front of you. First, you can try my method, which has a 1% chance of success. Second, you can give up and go back. You can stay in this world and forget everything about the other world. You can start over. Don't go around blindly. Ning Xuema said without hesitation, I choose the first one. Hua Baoyue said, I think you should think about it again. I heard from Bai Yun that you are pregnant. Even if you don't think about yourself, you have to think about the baby. Can you bear to let it die before it comes to this world? After all, the risk is great. Ning Xuema's body stiffened, and her fingers touched her belly. Hua Baoyue was right. She could risk it all, but what about her baby? Or she could wait until she gave birth to the baby and then try the first step that Hua Baoyue mentioned. Hua Baoyue kept looking at her and saw her expression. He knew that she was tempted and smiled. Let's think about it. You go back first. He knew what she was thinking, but he also knew that a woman's heart was basically made of water. After the baby was born, she would not bear to leave the baby. Maybe she would stay and not leave. It was better than letting her take such a big risk. As for her husband in the other world, he was not a good husband if he allowed his pregnant wife to wander around alone and get lost. Even if he was anxious, he deserved it. If Hua Baoyue's wife was pregnant, he would not leave her side at all times. Unfortunately, Lingxi had no intention of having a baby until now. He was lost in thought for a moment, and his eyes inadvertently looked at Ning Xuema's figure. His heart suddenly moved. How many months is your baby? Ning Xuema was startled and answered, 4 months and 10 days. She and Shinjioli had only had sex once, so she naturally remembered the date. Hua Baoyue frowned slightly, looked at her for a moment, and suddenly stepped forward. Give me your hand. Ning Xuema didn't know what he was up to. What are you doing? Hua Baoyue raised an eyebrow and said, at this point, you are still afraid that I will harm you. Haven't you heard of the Baoyue miracle doctor? Ning Xuema was taken aback. Naturally, she had heard of Bao Yu before. His medical skills were top-notch in the world, but he was rather lazy and did not treat people easily. Moreover, he kept a low profile and never appeared in the news media. Not many people knew his true colors. Ning Xuema had only heard of his name, but had never seen him in person. Who would have thought that the legendary Baoyue miracle doctor was actually this exorcist in front of him? Now that she knew Hua Baoyue's other identity, Ning Xuema no longer hesitated. She reached out her hand to let him feel her pulse. Hua Baoyue's frown deepened. Ning Xuema was also a doctor, but after all, it was her first pregnancy. Originally, her main focus was to treat injuries, so she did not understand pregnancy. Looking at Hua Baoyue's expression, she was a little frightened. Is there anything wrong? Are you sure the date is correct? Yes. When did it have fetal movement? A month ago. How has it been recently? It has barely moved. Hua Baoyue did not speak, and his frown deepened. Ning Xuema looked at him. In the end, what's wrong? Just tell me. Hua Baoyue pondered for a moment and sighed. Your situation is a little strange. Your baby is not acclimatized in this world, not acclimatized before it was born. Isn't this a little too ridiculous? Chapter 14:23. If someone else had said that, Ning Xuema would not have believed it. However, the person in front of her was a mighty immortal and a miracle doctor. Under Ning Xuema's relentless questioning, Hua Baoyue finally revealed his inference. According to the norm, it would only start to move after 4 months, but you're already moving after 3 months. This proves that this baby is developing ahead of its time. Perhaps its father's identity is special. However, you have been in this world for a month. According to its growth pattern, it should have developed better and stronger, and its fetal movements should be more frequent. However, it is obviously not so. Not only has it not grown, but it seems to have shrunk a lot. I just checked your pulse. It seems that you are at most 2.5 months pregnant. Ning Xuema's face turned pale. It had not moved much recently. She thought it was being obedient. It turned out that it was getting smaller and smaller. If it stayed any longer, would the baby die in the womb? No, it might not be that it was not acclimatized. Perhaps it was because she had been looking for the space door frequently in the past month and had not eaten or slept well. This delayed its growth. She told her inference. Hua Baoyue shook his head slowly. That may not be the reason. How about this? Let's go back first. You rest for a few days, and then we will see how the baby develops. This was indeed a good idea. Ning Xuema agreed. 5 days later. Hua Baoyue visited again. Ning Xuema had been staying at home for the past 5 days. She put aside all distracting thoughts and strictly followed the diet and rest schedule of a pregnant woman. Even if she did not have an appetite, she would eat some. She only hoped that the baby in her womb would be healthy. In the past 5 days, the baby's fetal movements were still very little. Even when it moved occasionally, it was very gentle. She even went to the hospital to do an ultrasound. After the doctor looked at the film, he said that her baby was about 2.5 months old. This made her very worried. Almost every half day, she would use her inner vision to check its size. It was really much smaller than it was a month ago. This made her feel very guilty. In the past few days, she ate and drank desperately, hoping to add some nutrition to it. However, it did not seem to be effective. After Hua Baoyue came again to check her pulse, he said the same thing. Her baby was indeed getting smaller every day. It seemed that her baby really had no fate with this modern society. If she continued to stay in this world, her baby might disappear before it was born. So, whether it was for the baby in her belly or for herself, she had to go back. Hua Baoyue could not help but sigh. Shuemo, what kind of husband did you find over there? This child actually grew in reverse in this world. What kind? He was just a god. Who would have thought that God's child would be fine no matter how much he struggled in the other world, but after coming to this world, he became weak and grew in reverse. It seemed that the children of God were not so strong in every world. Ning Xuemo was also complaining in her heart. She did not want to delay any longer. I have to go back. Brother Hua, please think of something as soon as possible. Xuemo, your body belongs to the other world. So, my method is to use your blood as a guide to open the path of reincarnation and send you back to the mirror world. However, it can only send you back to the starry sky over there. You still need to find a space door to go back. Also, because of some spells in the process, once this method is activated, there is no turning back. You will never be able to return to this world again. Knowing this, are you still sure you want to go back? Chapter 1424. Ning Xuemo closed her eyes slightly. I'm sure. She liked her own world very much, but she wanted to return to his side and let her baby be born healthy. 5 stars parade. Ning Xuemo didn't expect that Hua Baoyue would make such a big scene, and she didn't expect that he would call so many helpers. What was even rarer was that most of these helpers were extremely handsome. The gentle, elegant, and handsome Bai Zimo. The tall, handsome, and elegant Feng Qingyang. The lazy, frivolous, and evil Feng Shaosun. Plus, the casual Hua Baoyue with a smile on his lips. When these 4 men stood together, they could beat this oppa's legs by dozens of streets. These people each had their own style. If Ning Xuemo hadn't been used to seeing handsome men in the other world and had some aesthetic fatigue, she might have been dazzled by them. This time, among the helpers called by Hua Baoyue, there was only one woman. She looked to be 22 or 23 years old. She was cool and free, wearing a black dress, no windbreaker. She didn't wear many famous brands, but the cold temperament around her was unforgettable. She introduced herself to Ning Xuemo first and said straightforwardly, "Hello, I'm Yilingxi. This time, I'll take charge of sending you back to the mirror world. Hua Baoyue should have told you all the pros and cons. It's not too late to regret now." Ning Xuemo smiled and replied straightforwardly, "I won't regret it." She never regretted things that she had decided on. Yilingxi looked at her again, and a touch of admiration flashed through her eyes. Not every woman had this kind of courage. She gave up a comfortable life and took this kind of risk with a 1% hope. If she didn't succeed, she would die. She didn't know what kind of man in the other world made her so desperate. That man was really lucky to be loved by such a woman. She thought for a moment and stuffed a small red crystal stone into Ning Xuemo's hand. Take this. Maybe you'll need it in the most dangerous time. The small stone was only the size of a fingernail. It was heart-shaped and quite round, and it was slightly warm in her hand. Ning Xuemo gave her thanks and solemnly put away the stone. This might be the only thing she could take away from this world. She would keep it until the end of time as a souvenir. The mountain wind was biting cold. This was the peak of Mount Everest. Ordinary people might find it difficult to move around in this kind of place, but for the few people present, the wind and snow here were not a problem. According to Lingxi, when they were casting spells, they needed to be absolutely focused. They couldn't allow any external interference, not even modern electromagnetic waves. Therefore, this place was the most suitable. In the wind and snow, the 5 of them sat in 5 different positions, with Ning Xuema sitting in the middle. When everything was ready, they began to cast their spells. 5 samsara discs shot out from the palms of each of the 5 people. They were all black samsara discs, but when they were shot out by the 5 people, their colors were completely different. They were divided into white, green, blue, red, and yellow. They should correspond to the 5 elements of yin and yang, metal, wood, water, fire, and earth. 5 light waves carried the samsara discs of different colors and flew into the air. There, they spun rapidly according to the array. The 5-colored light was dazzling. Ning Xuema sat in the middle and stared at the 5-colored light above her head. She clenched her fists. A moment later, a golden vortex gradually appeared where the 5-colored light was spinning. Chapter 14:25. Ning Xuema flew up and followed Lingxi's instructions. She flicked her 10 fingers, and a drop of blood flew from each fingertip into the whirlpool. The golden whirlpool suddenly emitted a golden red light. The light fell straight down and covered Ning Xuema. It spun rapidly for a moment before slowly disappearing. After a while, even the golden whirlpool disappeared, and the sky returned to normal. However, Ning Xuema's figure was nowhere to be seen. The 5 people slowly stopped. In an instant, the 5-sided reincarnation disc fell back into their hands. The 5 people's faces were slightly pale. It was obvious that activating this array consumed a lot of spiritual energy. Even with their abilities, they could not bear it. Hua Baoyue watched the whirlpool disappear and sighed. We didn't let her down. We actually succeeded. I didn't expect it to be so easy. Feng Xiaoxuan snorted. With the 5 of us in charge, what can't we succeed? Among the 5 of them, 1 was once the boss of the demon world, 2 were outstanding talents in the exorcism world, 1 was a Greenhill Fox immortal, and 1 was the daughter of Nuwa. They could be said to be the most powerful partners. Once they worked together, there were few things that could be difficult for them. This time, activating the ancient teleportation array was no exception. It was said that activating this array required 5 exalted immortals to work together for a 50% chance of success. Among them, only 3 were at this level. The other 2 could not do it. That was why Hua Baoyue said there was only a 1% chance. Even the researcher of this ancient array, Lingxi, did not expect to succeed so easily. She looked in the direction Ning Xuema disappeared in a daze for a moment. Suddenly, she said, our easy success may have something to do with her physique. The other 4 people looked at her together. Hua Baoyue said, her physique. I've already checked. Her physique is indeed very good, but she hasn't become an immortal yet. Her skills should be about the same as Zimo and the others. The ancient array said that unless the person being teleported is an exalted immortal, there's a 100% chance of success. She's obviously not an exalted immortal. She's not even an immortal. It was rare for Feng Xiaoxuan to frown as well. To be honest, I always felt that she wasn't that simple. When he had first seen her, his heart had inexplicably trembled. Although this feeling was fleeting, it still surprised him greatly. Back then, even when he met the Heavenly Emperor, he did not have such a feeling. Hua Baoyue laughed and said, forget it. She has already left. There is no need to discuss her identity. Let's hope that she'll succeed and return to the man she loves. He hugged Lingxi and said, honey, you've done a great job this time. What do you want? Lingxi looked at him with a smile that wasn't a smile. I heard that you took advantage of the situation to rob a property worth tens of millions. How can you say that I'm looting a burning house? I'm doing business, fair and square. I earned it fair and square. You earned the property, but you want us to work hard for you. How are you going to repay us? Bai Zimo was never one to lose out. He smiled at Hua Baoyue. His words were approved by the other two men, so 3 pairs of eyes looked at Hua Baoyue, waiting for him to give an explanation. Hua Baoyue had a headache. All of you are so rich that you're oozing with oil. Why do you still care about this sum? The 3 men expressed their concern at the same time. They wanted to find an opportunity to make money. It was their common hobby to find an opportunity to make money. Chapter 14:26. In the end, it was agreed that Hua Baoyue would pay for the 3 men to tour the capital for 10 days. Only then did the matter settle down. The capital was expensive and the cost of living was high. Moreover, the 3 men spent money like water and were greedy for pleasure. Therefore, in these 10 days, it would cost at least a few million yuan. Hua Baoyue felt the pinch. Lingxi hugged his arm and said, "Why do you look so sad? Didn't you earn tens of millions? It's not too much to split a few million yuan, right?" Hua Baoyue sighed. "You don't know, but I didn't earn that property for myself. It was for Bai Yun." Then, he looked at Lingxi worriedly, afraid that she would suspect that he was having an affair. Seeing that Lingxi didn't have any suspicion, she was just a little puzzled. Bai Yun has plans to live there for a long time. Hua Baoyue nodded. Yes, she likes it there and wants to decorate it according to her own style. Lingxi, don't think too much. I'm just returning a favor to Bai Yun. Lingxi patted his shoulder. The truth is that you think too much. I never thought too much about it. You can do what you need to do. You don't have to explain to me. Then, she turned around and talked to the 3 men walking in front of her. The 4 of them discussed where to go and what kind of hotel to stay in. Hua Baoyue sighed, his Lingxi trusted him too much. He actually hoped that she would be jealous. In the jagged and floating asteroid belt, there was an orange-red planet shining faintly in the distance. When Ning Xuema saw this familiar scene, her legs suddenly went soft, and her eyes became sore and astringent. She finally found a familiar landmark. After floating in space for an unknown amount of time, she finally found the way home. Hua Baoyue was right. They did send her back to the mirror world. The mirror world was also vast and boundless. When she returned to the mirror world, she was also at a loss. Because she couldn't find the familiar scenery, she was still in the starry sky. At this point, she could only search with all her might. Fortunately, the spatial gates of this world were relatively easy to find. During this period, she entered 5 spatial gates and went to 5 planets. 2 of them had life forms, which meant that she could take a break and recover her strength. When she recovered more or less, she continued to search. There was no concept of time in outer space. She herself did not know how long she had been traveling. At the last time, she had just returned from a barren land. She did not replenish the psychokinesis needed to breathe in time. Her psychokinesis was in danger. Seeing that she was about to suffocate, she finally found another space door. After passing through that space door, she arrived here. The moment she saw the scenery here, she let out a long sigh of relief. The orange-red planet in the distance was where the immortal nation was located. As long as she could see it, she would be able to determine the route she needed to take back to the Heavenly Blessing continent. She would be able to go to the Sun-Moon sect and look for him. She finally saw hope. "Baby, we are finally back. Baby, I've finally succeeded in getting you back to the place where you grew up. Are you happy? Ning Xuema's palm gently caressed her lower abdomen as she used her thoughts to chat with the child. She had relied on this as her mental support to survive until now while she had been searching for a way out. Chapter 14:27. She raised her hand and touched her face. There were all kinds of harmful rays in space. In order to save her energy to look for the space door, she didn't set up a barrier around her body. She only used a small amount of psychokinesis to protect her belly to prevent her baby from getting hurt. In this way, her skin inevitably became rough and was no longer as delicate as before. She didn't need to look in the mirror to know that she probably looked like a haggard old woman. She couldn't be that beautiful and might even be ugly. However, as long as she could come back, she was satisfied. The problem with her rough skin could be recovered after a few days of careful maintenance. When she returned to the ground, she first went to the Immortal Kingdom to recover her psychokinesis and physical strength. Then, she used her inner vision to look at her baby in her belly. Her baby was very strong. She had been in space for so long, but it didn't become smaller. It even showed signs of becoming lively again. She finally heaved a sigh of relief. It seemed that the creatures in the different time and space were compatible with each other. She could live well in her own time, but her baby couldn't. Could it be that the pollution on Earth was too serious? Was it the effect of the smog? Ning Xuema guessed unkindly. However, it was strange. Her current body was compatible with both time and space. When she first transmigrated, other than complaining about their system, her body didn't feel any other discomfort. She was indeed the most resilient. Since she was already here, she wasn't in a hurry. She had been to the Immortal Kingdom a few times before, but every time, she came with someone else. Now, she was alone. Actually, it wasn't bad to be alone on the streets. She was free and did whatever she wanted. The things in the Immortal Kingdom were famous for being exquisite. When Ning Xuema first came here, she liked to buy some jewelry, clothes, and all kinds of delicious food. Now, she wanted to buy some children's things. After walking around, she couldn't find a store that sold children's products. Then, she remembered that the people in this country didn't age or die. They didn't have children either. Naturally, they wouldn't sell such things. However, she could go to a clothing store to customize. The people here were clever. As long as she told them the size and style, they would definitely be able to make it. Ning Xuema was the kind of person who would do what she thought. She immediately went to a clothing store and found a tailor to customize children's clothes. Although the tailor felt that it was strange, after seeing Ning Xuema's personally drawn measurements, he straightforwardly accepted the job. Ning Xuema was rich now, so she was naturally very rich. She ordered more than 10 sets of clothes in all sizes, for both men and women. In this way, whether the baby in her belly was a boy or a girl, they would have beautiful clothes to wear when they were born. The material of the clothes here was extremely soft and smooth. It would be very comfortable for the baby to wear. The Almighty was so beautiful that he didn't seem human, and she was one of the most outstanding beauties. Her baby would definitely be heaven-defying. She wanted to dress them up as little angels and carry them out so that everyone would praise them and love them. Thinking of her future baby, Ning Xuema couldn't help but smile. No matter if it was a boy or a girl, her baby would definitely be the best. Shinjiuli, I never thought that there would be a day when I would give birth to a little monkey for you. Seeing that you gave me such a good little steamed bun, elder sister will magnanimously forgive you for locking me up in the ice purgatory and throwing me into the cauldron without consulting me first. However, you have to make it up to me in the future. You have to be a good stay-at-home dad. You have to make the baby play. You have to make me happy. Chapter 1428. Thinking of Shinjuli taking care of the baby, Ning Xuemo couldn't help but laugh. No matter how she thought about it, that image was out of place, but it made her heart overflow with warmth. The tailor in the shop looked at her curiously. Seeing her smile and her overflowing happiness, he couldn't help but smile too. It was said that happiness was contagious, and now it seemed that it was really contagious. It turned out that being a mother felt so good. She looked at Ning Xuemo's figure again. Her figure was not out of shape at all, and she looked slim and slender. If it weren't for her custom-made clothes, and if it weren't for her calling him her little baby, no one would be able to tell that she was going to be a mother. Because the people of the Immortal Kingdom always made exquisite things, Ning Xuemo had to wait for a month to collect the custom-made clothes. A month here was equivalent to a day in the Tianxi continent. Ning Xuemo agreed happily and discussed with the tailor the date to collect the clothes. She paid the deposit and then walked out. She was now at the 9th level of the Earth rank. Although the storage space she cultivated was not as big as Shinjuli's, it could still store some miscellaneous things. Originally, her storage space was filled with elixirs, poisons, weapons, clothes, and the like. But now, her storage space was filled with some small items used by children. Hua Baoyue said that every space had its own rules. It didn't allow her to bring modern things back to this era. Otherwise, there might be an accident on the way back. So she had to give up the toy guns, airplanes, dolls, electronic keyboards, and other modern toys that she had bought for her child. However, she had wrapped a few bags of diapers in her clothes. Hua Baoyue turned a blind eye and let her get away with it. She made a large purchase in the Immortal Kingdom and then went to a place with abundant spiritual energy to cultivate her spiritual force for 2 days. She also repaired her already rough skin. Only when she was more or less done with her preparations did she begin her journey back to the Heavenly Blessing continent. Homesickness was more timid. Ning Xuemo deeply understood the meaning of these words, because she was now in this situation. Her return to the Tianxi continent this time went very smoothly. There were no twists and turns in the process. She was anxious to return home. She clearly wanted to go directly to the Sun-Moon Sept, but when she got close to the place, she became timid. She turned around and went to a small city near the Buddha Lotus Mountain first. The small city was affluent, and the common people lived and worked in peace and contentment. Streams of people flowed on the streets like colorful tides, and it was very lively. Ning Xuemo had been to this small town countless times, so she knew the local conditions and customs well. Probably because it was close to Buddha Lotus Mountain, there were many people cultivating here. The atmosphere was usually peaceful and serene. This was the first time she had seen it so lively. Regardless of gender, everyone on the street was dressed in bright and beautiful clothes. The peddlers who were running around earlier were all wearing long gowns, and they looked refined and elegant as they hawked their wares. As for the shops along the street, each and every one of them was extremely clean. The signboards on the doors were shiny, as if they had been freshly painted. It was as if the entire city had been reborn. It was unbelievably clean and beautiful. The small city was very pleasing to the eye, but Ning Xuemo was a little confused when she saw such a small city. What was wrong with this small city? Was there a new city lord who was obsessed with cleanliness? But even the city lord didn't have such great power to make the common people reborn to such an extent, right? Ning Xuemo saw with her own eyes that there used to be a peddler with a loud voice who was elegantly hawking candied haws there. Chapter 1429. Ning Xuemo saw with her own eyes that a hawker with a loud voice was elegantly hawking candied haws. Ning Xuemo almost thought that this hawker was possessed by some scholar. She walked forward and bought a stick of candied haws. She asked casually, "Your candied haws are not bad. I've always liked to eat them and have bought yours several times." I've always heard your loud voice and it was easy to find you. What's wrong this time? Is your throat uncomfortable? You're dressed so handsomely. Are you looking for a wife? That hawker laughed and even elegantly patted his long gown. My throat is very good. But Miss Lizine doesn't like to be too noisy, so I can't hawk loudly anymore. Lizine? Who was that? Ning Xuema was confused. She asked tentatively, is Lizine the daughter or relative of the new city lord? That hawker widened his eyes and sized up Ning Xuema. That gaze was as if he was looking at a monster. Miss, you don't even know who Lizine is. Was this Miss Lizine very famous? Ning Xuema replied that she had been traveling for a long time and had only returned recently. She really didn't know who she was. That hawker shook his head repeatedly and still had a look of disbelief. Even if you're traveling, you should know this lady. Who on Tianxi continent doesn't know her? Ning Xuema. She had only lost her way in space and had actually become a country bumpkin when she came back. Who exactly was this Lizine? She was so famous that everyone knew her and so many people had changed for her. She paused for a moment and asked about the current age of the book. After that hawker replied, Ning Xuema instantly felt that she had experienced many vicissitudes of life. It had already been 10 years since she left Tianxi continent. 10 years. Another 10 years had actually passed. According to this world's age, wouldn't she be 33 or 34 years old now? Coincidentally, there was a stall selling jewelry at the side. That stall had a mirror. Ning Xuema didn't say anything and picked up the mirror to look at herself. She finally heaved a sigh of relief. The image reflected in the mirror was still that of a young girl. She didn't look any different from before. She looked like she was 16 or 17 years old. She was so beautiful that people couldn't take their eyes off her. Only her skin was a little rough, but she only needed to rest for 3 to 5 days, and it would immediately become smooth again. Miss, you really don't know Miss Lizine. The jewelry seller was a talkative person and couldn't help but ask. I don't know. Who is she? Ning Xuema casually asked. Her fingers were still touching her face as she tried to figure out what to use to heal her face faster. She is the person that Di Zun Darren cares about the most. She is Di Zun Darren's fiancée. Today is the day of their engagement. Right now, many influential figures have rushed to Buddha Lotus Mountain to congratulate them. Us commoners naturally don't have the fortune to go there, so we're just dressing up below to add to their festive mood. That man was frank and outspoken. Once he opened his mouth, he would talk non-stop. Clang! The mirror in Ning Xuema's hand fell to the ground and broke into several pieces. Which ancestor? She asked softly. Which other ancestor? Isn't there only one ancestor in our Tianxi continent? The ancestor of Buddha Lotus Mountain's Sun Moon sect. Ah. That old man actually had the idea of marrying a wife. This is something that no one expected. When this news spread, everyone was as surprised as you. My mirror is very expensive. Miss, you have to compensate me a few taels of silver. Chapter 1430. Ning Xuema felt as if her heart had fallen into hell. Her hands and feet were cold. Although she tried her best to calm down, her hands and feet couldn't help but tremble. Where is this Lizine from? It was rare for the girl to have such a big reaction. The peddler was also proud of the power of his words. He poured out everything he knew. I don't know the details, but I heard that this girl is a Shangxin. She was personally brought back by Di Zun 10 years ago. She has been living on Tianin Peak all these years. Di Zun treats her very well and often brings her out to play. I was lucky enough to see her once. The candied hawthorn seller next to him was not happy that his topic was stolen, so he said, "I saw her too. I even saw Dizun buy a pearl hair clip for her. She was so beautiful when she put it on." Everyone on the street was stunned by her beauty. They talked about it happily. Ning Xuema's mind was buzzing, but she couldn't hear what they said after that. She casually slapped a large ingot of silver on a small jewelry stall, turned around, and walked away. 10 miles of long street, 10 miles of bustling streets. The street was paved with bluestones. It was obviously very smooth, but she felt that it was uneven under her feet. The people around her were like a tide, laughing and talking as they passed by her. It was very lively and prosperous. She was in such a crowd, but she felt cold all over. It was so lonely that it was scary. Someone accidentally bumped into her, someone apologized to her, and someone even asked her what was wrong. She didn't feel anything and just walked forward mechanically. It was as if she had walked to the end of the world. Unknowingly, she had walked to the end of the street. There was a wooden bench by the side of the road that tripped her. She staggered a few steps and sat down. Her hands and feet were cold and soft. The blood in her body seemed to have solidified at that moment, making her body stiff. When she walked here, it was as if all the strength in her body had been sucked away. She didn't want to take another step. It was morning, and it was late spring. The weather was warm. The sun had just risen and shone on Ning Xuema, making her face transparent like white jade. She was cold. The sun was so bright. The weather was so warm. She felt as if she had fallen into an ice cave. It was terrifyingly cold. This kind of coldness made her brain feel as if it had frozen. Her brain stopped working, and her mind went blank. Many thoughts seemed to be whizzing through her mind, but at the same time, she seemed to be thinking of nothing. She just sat there and looked at the sun and the sky, lost in thought. She didn't know how much time had passed when her lower abdomen suddenly moved. It was as if the baby had kicked her. This kick wasn't very strong and only made her belly bulge slightly. But it also directly kicked her out of her muddled state. Her body trembled, and her blood, which had been frozen stiff, finally began to flow. Her brain also began to work. The first thing that came to his mind was, what should he do? What was she going to do? It turned out that another 10 years had passed. It turned out that he had a new sweetheart. As it turned out, he was about to get engaged, and the other party was an extremely lofty exalted immortal. It had only been a few months since they broke up, but the world had completely changed. She seemed to recall what Shinjioli had said after he had been stabbed by her. "Okay, I'll let you go. You guys, take care of yourselves." It turned out that he had really chosen to let go at that time. He had really let go. She came back too late. Chapter 1431. No. The peddler said that Miss Lazine was brought back by Shinjioli 10 years ago. In other words, not long after she broke up with him, he met her and fell in love with her at first sight. She didn't know who said that the ancestor didn't have such thoughts, but once he did, the ladies who wanted to marry him would line up from one end of the Tian-Ci continent to the other. Now it seemed that it was true. He had found a new lover so quickly. Lazine had been with him for 10 years on the Tianyin Peak, but she had only been with him for 2 years. She had been with him for 2 years, but he didn't say anything about marrying her. At most, he would give her the position of a concubine. Lazine, on the other hand, had been with him for 10 years. Finally, their hearts clicked and they got engaged, becoming his official fiancé. Ha! What about her? What should she do? What should she do? Her blood was boiling in her chest, and in the end, her mind was filled with thoughts of what to do. She wasn't an impulsive person, and her previous profession made her unable to be impulsive at any time. So when she suddenly encountered such a fatal blow, she didn't do anything impulsive. Instead, she sat there calmly, trying her best to calm herself down, and then asked herself what to do. If it was her original personality, she would let go of her boyfriend easily and leave if he cheated on her and wanted to marry someone else. But now, she was really at a loss. When you really fell in love with someone, even if you knew it was impossible, it was still so difficult to let go. Her heart felt like it was soaked in ice water, and she needed to take a deep breath to stop it from going on strike. The sun shone on her face, making her eyelashes tremble. Her face was even paler than before. "Miss, what's wrong?" "Hey, miss, are you feeling unwell?" "Hey, miss? Miss?" Someone spoke beside her, and Ning Xuemo opened her eyes as if she was awakened. Then, she saw a circle of people around her. There were men and women, old and young. The person who spoke to her was a middle-aged woman. She worriedly touched Ning Xuemo's forehead with the back of her hand. "Miss, are you feeling unwell? You don't look well, are you sick? Do you want to see a doctor? I know a good doctor from a medical center in the city." The auntie was very enthusiastic. As she spoke, she wanted to help Ning Xuemo up. Ning Xuemo took a deep breath and shook her head with a forced smile. "I'm fine. I'm just a little dizzy because I'm tired from walking. I'll be fine after some rest." "Ah, so it's like this. Originally, I also had this problem, but after eating some sweets, I'll be fine." The auntie took out some homemade sweets from her pocket and quickly handed them to Ning Xuemo. "Child, eat one." At this time, Ning Xuemo's reaction was a little slow. Her actions were all subconscious. She took the candy and put it in her mouth. It was clearly a very sweet candy, but her mouth was filled with bitterness. The bitterness made her stomach churn. Ugh! She couldn't control herself and vomited. "Poor child, you are indeed not feeling well." The auntie patted her back gently. Ning Xuemo vomited so much that she couldn't raise her head. When she finally stopped vomiting, she raised her head. The auntie looked like she wanted to say something but hesitated. "Are you a young lady?" In this era, a young lady was a title for a married woman. Ning Xuemo didn't answer. In fact, she couldn't answer. The auntie asked again, Are you suffering from morning sickness?" Ning Xuemo shook her head slightly. She had never been suffering from morning sickness, let alone now. Chapter 1432. Shall I bring you to see a doctor then? You can't be like this. There's no need. Ning Xuemo could only spit out these two words before she spat out another mouthful of blood. The auntie couldn't hold it in any longer. You're vomiting blood. This won't do. I'll bring you to see a doctor. The madam is very nice, she's from the Sun Moon sect. She didn't finish her sentence because the girl who was so pale that she almost couldn't stand had disappeared into thin air. Everyone was speechless. A deity. Was that girl a deity? Everyone was still in awe of deities. They all knelt down, and the scene was a little chaotic. What's going on? A man with delicate features who looked very capable appeared at the scene and asked. This man was the outer disciple of the Sun Moon sect who was stationed in this small town. Although his position in the Sun Moon sect wasn't high, he was a master in the eyes of the people in this small town. Everyone immediately told him what they saw just now. The disciple specialized in collecting information. His martial arts might not be very high, but he was very knowledgeable. After listening to the story, his eyes were also filled with surprise. As far as he knew, there were very few people on this continent who could use the art of invisibility. One had to reach Earth rank level 8 to be able to do so. Even in the Sun Moon sect, only a few direct disciples of the ancestor could reach this level. There were even fewer people in the other sects who could do so. And it was even rarer for a woman to reach this level. Could it be? The disciple thought for a moment and began to report to the higher-ups. Ning Xuema just disappeared in public because she didn't want to be looked at like a monkey. She also didn't want to see a doctor. She was a doctor herself, so she naturally understood the condition of her body. The blood she vomited just now was just a mouthful of blood. She wouldn't die. Her heart was in a mess, and her chest and throat were burning. The baby in her belly probably also felt its mother's intense emotions. It also felt uncomfortable and kicked a few times in aggrievement. These kicks finally made Ning Xuema come back to her senses. She vomited out everything in her stomach, but her chest felt like it was stuffed with cotton. It was blocked and she didn't have any appetite. However, no matter what, she couldn't let the baby starve. For the sake of the baby's health, she should eat. She casually changed her clothes and appeared in another part of the small town. Then, she walked into a restaurant. The restaurant was originally a gathering place for gossip. After Ning Xuema entered the restaurant, the news of the ancestors' engagement filled her ears. Even if she didn't want to listen, she couldn't. From their words, she knew that Lu Xin had been very popular in recent years. She was very clean and liked to eat at restaurants. Every time Di Zun brought her out, he would book the entire place for her. He would clean the streets, clear the place, and get someone to serve her. Moreover, the ancestor was generous. Whatever this Miss Lu liked, as long as she told him, he would buy it for her without hesitation. Everyone's tone was filled with envy towards Miss Lu Xin, but not many of them were jealous or jealous. After all, Lu Xin's status was very high. She was a fairy. A fairy and the ancestor were well matched in terms of social status. Finally, there was a scholar who shook his head and concluded, Fairy Lu and the ancestor are a perfect match. They are a perfect match. In this world, only Fairy Lu can move the ancestor's heart. Chapter 1433. That's right, the peak where the ancestor resides is called Heavenly Sound Peak, and this girl is called Xin. A match made in heaven. A match made in heaven. That scholar added. Hearing this, everyone agreed one after another. The restaurant was bustling with noise. Ning Xuema felt that she couldn't hold the chopsticks in her hand anymore. She was afraid that she would lose control and stab that scholar's throat, so she forced herself to eat a few mouthfuls of rice before paying the bill. She raised her head to look at the sun in the sky. It was almost noon, and it was said that noon was the time of their engagement. Ning Xuema tried her best to calm down and consider this question calmly. Rumors among the people were often exaggerated, so she couldn't lose her composure after hearing a few words. Seeing is believing, and hearing is false. No matter what, she had to see for herself to find out the truth. Taking in a breath, and then another, she steadied her mind and soared into the sky, flying directly towards the Sun-Moon sect. The Sun-Moon sect was bustling with noise and excitement today. Basically all the reputable people in the Tian-Ci continent were here, and the Sun-Moon sect's main hall was truly packed with people. Yilu Jing and was going crazy with work. On one side, she was arranging seats for various guests, receiving congratulatory gifts, and on the other side, exchanging greetings with people of similar status. She was so busy that her feet didn't even touch the ground, and she didn't even have time to take a breather. If it was someone else's engagement, a few tables would be set up, and a few reputable people would be invited to participate. But the ancestor was different. He was the god of this continent, and for this kind of person to get engaged, everything must be the best. The best red silk, the best banquet, the best guests, the best decorations in the main hall. All the buildings in the Sun-Moon sect were repainted, and although there weren't big red sheet characters pasted everywhere like a wedding, they were all hung with red decorations. The ancestor didn't have any special requirements for this engagement banquet, and when Yellow Jing and went to ask, he only got 3 words: do as you see fit. Thus, Yellow Jing and did as she saw fit. With such an awesome master getting engaged, wouldn't he want the best? So from the decoration of the entire building to the placement of a pot of flowers in the main hall, Yellow Jing and personally took care of everything, no matter how big or small. Even the red gauze fluttering on the eaves was made of shark silk, fluttering in the air like ribbons in the sea. Almost every guest who came here would be shocked by this extravagant spending. In his heart, he praised the Sun Moon sect for being so rich. How tasteful! It was already time. Yellow Jing and couldn't help but look in the direction of Tianyin Peak. Why hadn't Master and his future master's wife come down yet? Were they going to show off their love on the peak? There were still so many people here waiting and watching. This engagement also had to be particular about the auspicious time. It would be bad if the time was missed. The sound-transmitting talisman at Yellow Jing An's waist flashed. Yellow Jing An was in the middle of exchanging conventional greetings with a sect leader and had no time to receive him. Looking at the light emitted by the sound-transmitting talisman, it was a message from a low-level outer sect disciple. It was probably about the discovery of the demon trace. He received dozens of such messages a day, so he didn't care much about it. It didn't matter whether he received it or not. He casually threw the sound-transmitting talisman to a disciple accompanying him, telling him to take the call. If there wasn't anything important, then there was no need to report. That disciple indeed walked to a corner to take the call. From the other end came the voice of an outer sect disciple, saying that a woman had appeared in Liteo City, and that she knew the art of invisibility. Chapter 1434. Yellow Jing An's disciple didn't mind, casually reprimanding the outer sect disciple. There are many demons in this world who know this kind of trick. There are even some who don't understand and think they're immortals. You can just check with the other disciples. The outer sect disciple could only agree, and the sound transmission talisman finally extinguished. Yellow Jing An finally found the time to ask after finishing this wave. The disciple replied, "Master, it's nothing. There seems to be traces of a female demon in Litao City. The outer sect disciples are investigating further." Yellow Jing An nodded, not minding. Demons often appeared now, but most of them were just looking for food or clothes. They didn't cause trouble, so the Sun Moon sect was too lazy to pay attention to them. The sun had risen to the middle of the sky, and it was close to a good time. Suddenly, someone whispered, "The ancestor is here." This voice was like a ladle of water being poured into a pot of hot oil. The crowd instantly flared up, and everyone collectively looked in one direction. 2 people were floating down from Heavenly Sound Peak side by side. A man and a woman. The man was wearing a cloud-white robe with wide sleeves. His robe swayed behind him, forming a cloud path. He still wore a mask on his face, but this time, the mask didn't cover his entire face. It only covered the part above his lips, revealing his perfectly curved thin lips. It was the ancestor. The woman beside him was wearing a red dress. She had black hair and red lips. Her eyes were bright and resplendent, and she wore a cloak of the same color. The style was somewhat similar to the ancestors. At first glance, it looked like a couple's outfit. This woman was extremely beautiful, so beautiful that she didn't have the slightest bit of fire. When she flew down side by side with the ancestor, it was indeed very pleasing to the eye. People couldn't help but think of 2 words, immortal couple. This was a true immortal couple. In this world, there was no other pair that could compare to this pair in terms of appearance and elegance. It was only natural that they would get engaged. If they missed each other, it would simply be letting down the heavens' painstaking arrangements. The guests below all gave each other a thumbs up in their hearts, and were unprecedentedly convinced by this pair. Although most of these guests had heard of Lizine's name, many of them were seeing her for the first time. Who knew how many people were stunned after seeing Lizine's true appearance? This was a real beauty. A beauty capable of causing the downfall of a city. Her skin was as white as the clouds, and her eyes were as bright as the stars. When she turned slightly, it was as if there was a river of stars flowing in her eyes, making people unable to look away. What was even rarer was that this beauty was born with a smile. There were two beautiful dimples on her snow-white cheeks, making people feel happy at first sight. It seemed that after seeing her smile, even the biggest troubles could be thrown aside. Greetings, Di-Zun. Everyone inside and outside the hall bowed towards the sky. The sound of the mountain almost shook the entire Buddha Lotus Mountain. The ancestor floated in the air, his ink-black eyes drooping. No one could tell whether he was happy or angry. He only spat out one word, exempt. His voice was low and magnetic, like the first breeze in the morning sky. Only then did everyone thank him and stand up. The ancestor and Lizine landed on the red carpet that was spread out from the main hall. The red carpet was covered with petals of unknown flowers. The fragrance of the flowers was strong, and the petals were as light as cotton. As the two people landed, the petals fluttered between their robes. Shinjuli frowned almost imperceptibly. He was wearing a mask, so no one could see his frown. Lizine's bright eyes curved into two crescent moons. Chapter 1435. She turned in a circle, her skirt fluttering as the petals circled around her even more happily. Brother D, these petals are so beautiful. When Lizine smiled, the sun in the sky didn't seem so bright anymore. Almost everyone was dazzled. You're even more beautiful. Who knew how many people added this sentence in their hearts? Beautiful, innocent, sweet, and with a bit of charm in her bones, all these characteristics gathered on her, making all the men's hearts beat wildly and all the women clench their fists. Shinjuli's gaze swept over Yellow Jinghan, who was bowing to him outside the red carpet. That gaze was slightly cold, but there was no emotion. Yellow Jinghan stood there with his head lowered, feeling like his back was being pierced by the gaze. He felt a slight chill, somewhat unable to touch the door. Did Master think it wasn't grand enough? That these petals weren't dreamy enough? One had to know that these flowers were treasures, called the velvet albizia flower. The petals were as soft as velvet and grew in pairs. They had a very good medicinal value and were extremely rare. They grew deep in the mountains where ferocious beasts ran rampant. Usually, one flower was worth 1,000 gold, more expensive than ginseng. His disciples had suffered a lot in order to pick these flowers. One of them even almost lost a leg. Just now, he had picked these flowers and laid them on the ground to create a magnificent effect. It seemed that the future master's wife liked these flowers very much, but Di-Zun didn't seem to like them. Recently, Master's thoughts were becoming more and more difficult to guess. Yellow Jing and deeply felt that his master's calmness had improved greatly in these 10 years. Originally, he could guess a little bit of his master's thoughts from a few words, but now, he couldn't guess at all. He only knew that his master's temperament was even colder and more solemn. When he got a little closer, his heart felt like it would be frozen. For example, this engagement ceremony, Di-Zun didn't ask any more questions after that one sentence. He didn't even come to take a look. He was really a big shopkeeper who didn't do anything. Only he suffered. He was desperately busy preparing everything. He couldn't eat or sleep well. He was so tired that the dark circles under his eyes overlapped several times. It wasn't easy being Di-Zun's disciple. Especially being Di-Zun's disciple, it was even more difficult. It was said that the emperor's will was hard to fathom. If he had to say, Master's will was even harder to fathom. Yellow Jing and mocked himself bitterly. Although an engagement couldn't compare to a marriage, Yellow Jing and deeply felt that the ancestors' engagement ceremony should still have music to liven things up. Of course, the music couldn't be those vulgar joyous tunes of the secular world. Instead, it was a pipe tune that Yellow Jing and had specially arranged for a disciple who was good at music to play. In addition to the sound of a guqin, the two kinds of music traveled over from an unknown place, carrying a faintly discernible immortal aura as it leisurely reverberated over the entire main hall. All the guests couldn't help but praise in their hearts. This music was too beautiful. It was too extraordinary. This was too befitting of an emperor. The dimples on Lizine's cheeks deepened, and her eyes became brighter. She raised her hand to hold on to Shinjuli's arm and smiled like a blooming flower. Brother D, this music is so beautiful. Thank you. Shinjuli paused for a moment. His body was slightly stiff, but he quickly returned to normal. He said, as long as you like it. His tone was light, with a hint of affection. This made all the guests exclaim in admiration in their hearts. It was said that the ancestor doted on Lizine. Seeing it today, it was indeed true. Chapter 1436. It was said that the ancestor pampered Lizine very much. Seeing it today, the rumors were true. The ancestor pampered this girl a lot. How domineering was a sentence of, as long as you like it. Countless girls looked at Lizine with envy. To be able to receive the ancestor's love, this girl was really the luckiest girl in the world. Lizine's eyelashes curved and her snow-white cheeks blushed. Under the sunlight, it was as if her cheeks were dyed with rouge. In the Tian-Ci continent, there were certain procedures for getting engaged. For example, walking the red carpet together, drinking wine together, exchanging tokens of love. It was similar to the modern-day engagement ceremony. Once the two parties exchanged tokens of love, it meant that the ceremony was complete. The girl would officially become the fiancée of the man. After that, they would go through the process of marriage. Usually, the difference between the engagement and marriage would be less than a year. Their engagement ceremony was held in the main hall of the Sun-Moon sect. This hall was tall and majestic. Usually, when the Sun-Moon sect had a big event or some celebration ceremony, this main hall would be opened. The original decoration style of this hall was solemn and solemn. Just like the People's Hall, it could accommodate 1,000 people at the same time. But now, the decoration style was completely different. Red silk fluttered in the wind, silver bells rang, and flowers bloomed. The atmosphere was joyous and dreamy. Once they entered, the most eye-catching thing was red. Red screens, red ribbons, red tabletop, red plates, red lamps, different shades of red reflected in the eyes. Shinjuli paused again. Lizine also pursed her lips. It's too festive, Jing-en. Shinjuli's gaze turned to Yellow Jing, and who was following behind. Yellow Jing and was full of apprehension. When he heard the call, he went forward and bowed. Ancestor. Change it. Shinjuli only said 2 words. Yellow Jing and was speechless. Change what? In this hall full of glittering jewels, he really didn't know which one his master wasn't satisfied with. Ancestor, you should at least point out a specific direction. Master, what's wrong? He could only brace himself and ask. Shinjuli's gaze swept across the hall. It was rare for him to say more words. Is there anything wrong? Yellow Jing-an's body stiffened. His jaw almost dropped. None of them were appropriate. Heavens, if there were 1 or 2 problems, he could quickly send people to replace them. If there were still problems, it would be a huge project to replace them. Even if he grew 8 arms at the same time, he wouldn't be able to change them all in a short period of time. Moreover, the auspicious hour was about to arrive. Lizine also seemed to know that it was inappropriate to change all of them. She hurriedly said, "Brother D, there's no need to change. This is actually not bad." It looked quite festive, in line with today's good day. "I was just saying." Shinjoli's eyes darkened. "Since you're not satisfied, why do you have to put up with it?" He didn't feel like wasting words with Yellow Jing'an and waved his sleeve. Thus, under the shocked gazes of the guests, the hanging red silk, red flowers, and red tablecloths in the hall all disappeared. The originally jubilant hall was restored to its original state, solemn and sacred as if a congress was about to be held. Yellow Jing'an opened her mouth but didn't dare to speak. She was crying silently in her heart. Did the ancestor know how much effort he had spent to decorate this hall? The horizontal board and the red silk flowers at the corner of the table were all personally arranged by him. He almost didn't sleep the whole night. If he had known that his master disliked these things, he wouldn't have stayed up all night to work. Chapter 1437. His gaze then landed on Lizine. His master really doted on this fiancée of his to the extreme. She had only said, "too festive," and his master had removed all the festive colors without a second word. "You should at least leave a big red flower on the board. It can't be too festive, but you can't not be festive, right?" Now, the entire hall didn't look like an engagement ceremony at all. It looked more like a martial arts convention. Lizine didn't seem to expect Shinjoli to do this and was momentarily stunned. Shinjoli looked sideways at her and asked, "Are you satisfied with this?" Yellow Jing'an's gaze quickly turned to Lizine, afraid that she would say that she wasn't satisfied and make other requests before dressing up. If that happened, it would be too late. This marriage was definitely not going to happen. Lizine didn't dare to say that she wasn't satisfied. She quickly nodded and smiled sweetly. "Satisfied, this is the best. Zine is very satisfied." "It's good that you're satisfied." Shinjoli nodded slightly. He glanced at Yellow Jing'an, who was standing at the side in a daze. "Let's begin." "Begin what?" "A meeting." No, it was Master's engagement ceremony." Yellow Jing'an took a deep breath and tried her best to get the feeling back. Under his command, all the guests began to take their seats. There were hundreds of tables in the hall. All the guests were the most prestigious people in the continent. Even the monarchs of the 5 countries were all present. They were the same as the heads of the various sects and naturally sat near the center. These tables surrounded the high platform where the ceremony was held, like stars surrounding the moon. There was a red carpet path on the high platform that led to the outside. The entire layout could be said to be sparse and exquisite, extremely appropriate. The dozens of disciples of the venerable emperor who was still alive were all present. At this moment, they were standing on both sides of the high platform, looking extremely imposing. Helian Zhao's status was low. Originally, he didn't even have a seat in the hall, but after all, he was a prince of a country. This guy was a genius in martial arts, but he was clumsy when it came to doing odd jobs. Therefore, Yellow Jing'an simply let him sit behind his father. Because everything had been arranged in advance, everyone took their places very quickly and quickly sat down. Everyone present was a well-mannered person. Besides, no one dared to make a ruckus during the ancestors' engagement ceremony. Therefore, even though there were many people present, the hall was very quiet. Only the sound of music drifted through the air, lingering in everyone's ears. A tower of wine cups was placed on the ancient and heavy table. The wine cups were all carved out of crystal and were neatly arranged in a certain order, from the lowest to the highest, and from the most to the least. At the very top were two cups that were close to each other. They were carved into the shape of mandarin ducks, and their necks were intertwined as they snuggled together. Yellow Jing and held a small red wine flask in her hand, slowly pouring wine into the wine cup tower. The golden wine slowly poured into the two wine cups at the top, and then overflowed into the wine cups at the bottom. Speaking of which, it was strange. That small wine pot was obviously not big, but the wine inside seemed to be endless, as if it would never run out. Finally, all the wine cups were filled to the brim. They were shining brightly on the table, like a tower of crystal and gold. According to the procedure, the future newlyweds would drink the top 2 cups of wine, and the rest of the wine cups would be distributed to the guests below. They would all be tainted with the joy of the newlyweds. After pouring the wine, Yellow Jing and an 8th senior brother each held a cup and respectfully handed it to the venerable emperor and Lizine. The golden wine gently swayed in the cup. Shinjioli looked at the cup for a moment and didn't move, as if he was pondering. Chapter 1438. It wasn't until Lizine touched his arm with her elbow in confusion that he came back to his senses and took the wine cup. Lizine's eyes lit up as she waited for Shinjioli to raise his cup to her. Shinjioli lowered his eyes and looked at the wine cup. He clenched his fist so tightly that his fingertips turned white. The other wine cups had been distributed by the Sun Moon Sect's disciples to the various tables and into the hands of everyone with status. Everyone held their wine cups and stood up, waiting for the Dizun and Lizine to clink their cups. Then, they would raise their wine cups to congratulate the Dizun and Lizine before downing their cups in one gulp. This would signify the end of the climax. This meant that the engagement ceremony was more than half completed. The exchange of tokens would be considered a complete success. According to the usual practice, the man should raise his cup first before the woman shyly clinks her cup. However, Shinjioli just stood there without moving. The auspicious hour was about to pass. Everyone's arms were sore from holding their wine cups, but they didn't dare to rush him. They just looked at each other and then at the Dizun. They didn't know what the Dizun was thinking of. Lizine's blushing face turned slightly pale. She finally couldn't help but call out softly, "Brother D." Shinjioli slowly raised his head and looked at her. He paused for a moment before finally raising his wine cup and saying, "Please." Yellow Jing'an, who was standing at the side, almost dropped his wine cup. "Master, you should be saying, 'please,' at this time and not 'please' like in normal occasions. This doesn't conform to etiquette." Lizine obviously knew about this etiquette. After all, she had already asked Yellow Jing and about the rules and procedures of this engagement banquet. Thus, she knew everything. Now that she heard Shinjioli say this word, she was stunned. She didn't know whether to clink her cup or to remind him secretly. Yellow Jing and was a smooth and slick person. He risked his life to send a voice transmission to the Dizun. "Master, please, please." He had once given his master a small note regarding the rules of the engagement ceremony. He believed that his master had read it before. Now that he had made a mistake, he probably forgot about it. Shinjioli frowned slightly. He glanced at Yellow Jing and ignored him. Shinjioli seemed to be a little impatient. He raised his wine glass again and spoke more straightforwardly this time. Bang. "Yellow Jing and, Master, you didn't read the notes that disciple painstakingly wrote for you, right?" "He didn't see it, did he?" Lizine made up her mind. She smiled and lightly clinked her wine cup with Shinjioli's wine cup, making a tinkling sound. She also took the opportunity to say one word, "close." Since he had forgotten to say it, she would do it. The other guests, who had been waiting with wine glasses in their hands, finally breathed a sigh of relief. They looked at each other and were about to say the congratulatory words they had prepared. Suddenly, a few clanging sounds came from outside. It was the hurried sound of a pipa. This pipa sound was extremely strange. It actually made the sound of metal and stone. It tore through the main hall like silk and interrupted the originally leisurely sound of the guccine and pipa. This sudden sound was extremely shocking, causing the hearts of almost everyone in the main hall to tremble. Some of the weaker ones were shaken by the sound of the pipa. The wine cup in their hands directly fell to the ground and shattered with a bang. Shinjoli's fingers that were holding the wine cup suddenly froze. The wine in the cup suddenly shook, and a part of it splashed out onto the back of his hand. He didn't seem to notice and raised his head to look outside the hall. Chapter 1439. Yilu Jing An's expression changed slightly. He hadn't arranged for anyone to play the pipa at this time, so this person obviously wasn't invited. And the Sun Moon sect was heavily guarded. Without an invitation and a Sun Moon sect disciple leading the way, it was absolutely impossible for an outsider to enter the Sun Moon sect. Then how did this person come in without anyone noticing? And they only found out when he came to play the pipa outside the main hall. Dereliction of duty. This was a serious dereliction of duty. His figure rose, rushing towards the door. Who is it? Dizun's other disciples were also well trained. In a flash of light, they had already lined up in a row at the entrance of the hall. Facing the direction of the door, they asked in a deep voice, "Who has come uninvited?" The light at the entrance of the hall dimmed, and a large red figure appeared. "It's me." The voice was clear and crisp like spring water dripping down from the mountains. It was a woman, and as soon as she appeared, everyone's eyes almost popped out. She wore a large red tube top embroidered with peony flowers, and a translucent scarlet shawl covering her body. Below, she wore a fiery red short skirt, and a thin translucent shawl of the same color was tied around her waist, fluttering with her movements. A pair of pink and smooth long legs were faintly discernible under the shawl. Her feet were bare, and a thin silver chain was tied around her snow-white ankles. There were 2 crystal bells on the silver chain, jingling as she walked. Her long hair was like a waterfall, draping over half her body. There was a circle of flowers on top of her head, and a flower the size of a teacup was in full bloom. Her arms were also bare, and there were silver bells on her wrists. Her feet seemed to be stepping on some kind of rhythm, so the silver bells on her body rang. Ding-ling-ling, ding-ling-ling-ling, as if she was playing some kind of music. Her face was covered with a large red shawl, which covered most of her face, only revealing a pair of eyes. There was a flame-shaped flower ornament between her eyebrows, which made her eyes look like flowing water, overflowing with light as she looked around. She should be dressed like a dancer, but she was different from ordinary dancers. No matter how beautiful or hot a dancer was, they didn't have her temperament. And they didn't have the impact that she gave people. She was like a charming poppy flower fairy, slowly walking in. The red veil fluttered behind her like flames. Her feet were like crescent moons. Her delicate toes stepped on the red carpet. Red and white contrasted, making the red redder, and the white whiter. Everyone present was an influential figure, and they had seen many beautiful women in their lives. It was inevitable that they would have some aesthetic fatigue. No matter how beautiful a woman was in front of them, most of them would treat her as nothing. Lizine was indeed beautiful. She was so ethereal that one couldn't take their eyes off her. However, none of them were as impactful as the woman who had just appeared. This woman gave people a powerful shock. Everyone felt as if their hearts had been struck by a heavy hammer. They held their breaths. There were even people who stood up in a daze. Bang! The wine glass in Shinjioli's hand shattered. When Yilu Jing saw the woman's appearance, it was as if she was struck by lightning. She blurted out, "Little junior sister." Although the woman was wearing a veil, Yellow Jing, and was still very familiar with her. His eyes had always been very sharp. Even if he didn't look at her face, he could tell from her figure. Even though he had always been as calm as a mountain, his heart was beating wildly at this moment. He couldn't help but look at his master. All these years, little junior sister had always been a taboo in the Sun-Moon sect. No one dared to mention her again. Who would have thought that she would appear today after disappearing for 10 years? And dressed like this. Chapter 1440. Everyone in the hall was shocked by Yellow Jing An's shout. Everyone knew that there was only one person that Yellow Jing An called junior sister, the legendary figure from 10 years ago, Ning Xuemo. She used to be the ancestor's disciple, but 10 years ago, she entered the devil world and became the devil world's demon emperor. She also became the public enemy of many sects present. The ancestor personally passed down a decree to cut off their master-disciple relationship. It was said that he wanted to personally clean up the sect and not let other sects interfere. Just as everyone was waiting for the news of the ancestor personally punishing his disciple, news spread that she and the devil world's number 2 figure, Shuilan, had disappeared together. These 10 years, no one had seen her. Everyone was already guessing whether the ancestor had silently killed his disciple along with the devil head. It was just that he didn't announce it. But they didn't expect that she would actually appear at this moment. And in such a high-profile manner. No matter how beautiful a woman was, if she was from the devil world, then she was still a poppy flower that must be eradicated. Those cultivators who were originally stunned immediately felt their sense of justice explode, suppressing their pity for the beauty, which, you actually dare to come to the Sun-Moon sect to cause trouble? Which, you're tired of living? Are you voluntarily coming to die? Which, everyone shouted one after another, and some people even took out their weapons. There were even some impatient guests who wanted to show off their skills in front of the ancestor. They raised their hands and threw out their weapons. Flying daggers, flying swords, flying wheels, and even flying rods were all raised into the air. They spun around and shot towards Ning Xuemo. Yellow Jing An's expression changed. Those who could come to the Sun-Moon sect's engagement banquet weren't weak. Almost all of them were experts among experts. With these people joining forces to attack Ning Xuemo, how could she block them? He raised his hand, about to receive the flying knives and swords, but his arms suddenly went numb, and he couldn't move for a moment. He opened his eyes wide and looked at the ancestor, his eyes filled with disbelief. Master actually stopped him. Could it be that Master's hatred for little junior sister had reached such an extent that he wanted to watch her being dismembered here? Before Yellow Jing An could fully understand, those flying daggers and flying swords had already shot towards Ning Xuemo like locusts. Ning Xuemo's eyes flashed slightly. She raised her wrist and a green light shot out, spinning in the air, clang. 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 Those flying swords and knives were tangled up by the green light. Then, the green light abruptly retracted. Following a few muffled sounds in the air, countless flying swords and knives fell to the ground. All of this happened within a few seconds. Those who were slow to react didn't even understand what had happened. Ning Xuemo had easily resolved her crisis and destroyed a large number of weapons. She stood there gracefully, not even a strand of her hair out of place. If it wasn't for the pile of scrap metal at her feet, she would have thought that the attack just now was just a dream. Yellow Jing An, since when did little junior sister's martial arts become so shocking? It seemed like it was even taller than him. These people were thwarted in the blink of an eye. The other immortal cultivators were shocked and could no longer sit still. One after another, they took out their weapons, intending to attack. But when they saw the ancestor move, they froze. The ancestor was already sitting on the high platform. The shattered crystal cup at his feet sparkled like stars. His eyes fell on Ning Xiumo's body. His gaze was extremely deep and dark. Although he didn't speak, there was a kind of pressure coming from his body. Chapter 1441. Although he didn't say anything, there was an oppressive aura around him. This aura caused those who were eager to rush over to kill the devil to freeze. They didn't even dare to breathe loudly, let alone attack Ning Xiumo. Brother D. Lu Xian's expression changed slightly. She called out softly and approached him. Ning Xiumo slightly raised her head to look at him. The two people's gazes collided with each other, separated by a distance of several dozen meters. It was as if they were fighting invisibly. His eyes were too deep and cold. When he looked at her, there was no expression on his face. It was hard to tell what he was feeling. After thinking and missing him for so long, she finally saw him again. However, it was under such circumstances. Her heart hurt, but it hurt so much that it felt numb. Ning Xiumo wasn't late, but she wasn't early either. She felt that she was no longer a disciple of the Sun-Moon sect. They were probably enemies. Therefore, she didn't come here to deliver a greeting card. Instead, she came here invisibly. Although the Sun-Moon sect's enchantment was strong, it couldn't stop her, who was familiar with the Sun-Moon sect's enchantment. Furthermore, she came from the sky and landed on the Heavenly Sound Peak. The Heavenly Sound Peak originally had an enchantment. Only the disciples of the venerable sovereigns could enter at certain times with the help of their jade tokens. Ning Xiumo used to be the most special one. She didn't need to use her jade token. She could use the patterns on her palm to press down on the enchantment at any time. This time, when Ning Xiumo landed on the peak, she didn't find the enchantment protecting the peak. To be exact, there was no enchantment above. She came in easily. She stood there in a daze for a moment. When she first became his disciple, she suffered a lot because of his enchantment. There was once when she almost drowned in his wall-like enchantment. He didn't remove the enchantment and didn't even change it. Now, was it because of Lu Xian? Was Lu Xian an idiot who dispelled enchantments? Or was it because of today's engagement ceremony? Ning Xiumo walked around the Heavenly Sound Peak with her chaotic emotions. The bamboo forest was still the same as before, and nothing in the surroundings seemed to have changed. The entire Tianyin Peak was quiet, and not a single person could be seen. When she finally made up her mind and went to the main hall where Shenjiuli lived, she was stunned for a long time. Shenjiuli's main palace was still there, and it didn't look any different. Just like the rumor said, the side hall she used to live in was no longer there. The two sides of the main hall were empty, just like her empty heart. Back then, when she heard the rumor that he had demolished the side palace she lived in, although she didn't say anything on the surface, she still didn't believe it in her heart and still held on to a tiny bit of hope. Now that she had seen it with her own eyes, she had no choice but to believe it. It seemed like he really intended to cut off all ties with her at that time. She looked around again, but could not find the second building. Rumor had it that Lu Xian was staying at Tianyin Peak. Logically speaking, there should be a building built especially for her. Why couldn't he find it? Could it be that he would live in the same palace as Shenjiuli? This thought was like a fire burning in her chest. She thought for a while and decided to enter the main hall. The moment she entered, she smelled the light scent that belonged to Shenjiuli. She was dazed for a moment before she started to search in the main hall. The living room, the chess room, the practice room, the study room, the alchemy room, and finally his bedroom, there were traces of him everywhere in these places. Chapter 1442. His books, his paintings, the pots that he polished himself, the inkstone that he made himself. When everything that was once familiar to her appeared in front of her eyes again, her heart swelled. She once thought that she could let go of everything easily, but now, she realized that they were deeply engraved in her heart and could never be forgotten. Coming back here again, she felt like a wanderer who had returned home. This feeling lasted until she reached the Di-Zun's bedroom. When Ning Xuema lived here later on, she had been to Shinjuli's bedroom countless times. The door was always open to her, and Shinjuli did not guard against her at all. Although there was a wizardry barrier around his bedroom, it was useless to her. This was because the Almighty had personally taught her how to break the wizardry barrier. He even supervised her to break it and made sure that there were no mistakes before letting her go. Later on, although he lost his memory and she became his real disciple, the wizardry barrier did not change. She could still enter and leave as she pleased. This time, she found that the wizardry barrier was completely different. It was an extremely advanced wizardry barrier. The moment she arrived, she was bounced back by the wizardry barrier. She got up and looked at it for a moment. The wizardry barrier was awe-inspiring, and the psychokinesis flowing on it was extremely strong. It was not something that she could break at the moment. She would never be able to enter his chambers again. She paused at the door for a long time. Just as she was about to look elsewhere, she saw that the door of a hall beside her was half closed. This hall was also a part of Shinjuli's bedroom. It was usually used for storing miscellaneous items, and no one lived here. Ning Xuema did not know what she was thinking, but she pushed open the door and walked in. Then, she stood there in a daze. The area of the hall was not big, and everything could be seen at a glance. All the miscellaneous items inside were gone, and in its place was a crystal bed. The light pink bed curtain was slanted on both sides. Neatly arranged bedding was revealed, and there were even a few pieces of women's clothes on the bed. There were a few other pieces of furniture in the hall. Although they were simple, they were very elegant. This room was obviously a woman's boudoir. There was also a faint fragrance in the hall. Needless to say, Luzine usually stayed here. No wonder she couldn't find Luzine's room in Tianyin Peak. It turned out that she lived here, next to Shinjuli's bedroom. Ning Xuema had spent quite a bit of time in this junk hall, because Shinjuli liked to pile up a lot of useless things here. To him, they might be useless, but to Ning Xuema, there were still many treasures here. She often found things she liked in there. This room gave her the feeling of a treasure hunting room. Every time she came, she would stay for a long time. But now, she could not stay here any longer. The aura here was suffocating her. She turned around and left. If it was said that she still had some hope when she first came to the Heavenly Sound Peak, all of her hopes were dashed now. She stood there. As there was no enchantment barrier, she could faintly hear cheerful and elegant music coming from below. Then, she saw fireworks rising into the sky. It was obvious that the engagement banquet below had begun. It turned out that she had risked her life to come back here just to attend his engagement banquet. The things were still the same, but the people were no longer the same. It turned out that she was the only one who stayed here, but he had already left. Baby, it turns out that you are destined to have no father in this life. It's okay. Chapter 1443. Don't worry, after I'm done with him, I'll take you to other continents and find a place where no one knows us. Ning Xuema's finger gently stroked her belly as she whispered to the little baby inside. She found a secluded corner and changed into a set of clothes. She was wearing the same set of clothes she wore when she danced the Pipa dance in the Chongkong country's palace. At that time, she shocked everyone with her dance and became his concubine with Shinjuli, who was disguised as Han Shangyue. That was how they got entangled later. She would end it where she started. This was in line with her usual style of doing things. Therefore, she hid herself and came to the main hall where the wedding was held. Then, she appeared in a high-profile manner. Once her identity was exposed here, she would be attacked by the righteous people. She was mentally prepared, so she dealt with it calmly. She was very powerful now, so her eyes were very sharp. She saw Shinjoli's little tricks. When those people attacked her, it was Shinjoli who secretly stopped Yellow Jing and from helping. After not seeing her for 10 years, he really couldn't wait for her to die. If she died in front of him like this, he probably wouldn't even frown, right? She clearly broke those weapons and wasn't hurt at all, but her heart felt like it was stabbed by a knife. She pursed her lips and met his gaze without flinching. She smiled softly. Is this how the Sun Moon sect treats its guests? She said the first sentence after entering the door. Her voice was still cold. She kicked the scrap metal under her feet with the tip of her foot, and the pile of things made a clattering sound. You're not a guest of the Sun Moon sect, so they can't represent the Sun Moon sect. Shinjoli said, his voice as cold as usual. Although she was mentally prepared, Ning Xuema's bright eyes still dimmed. So in his heart, she didn't even have the right to be a guest. She smiled. Then in the eyes of the Dizun, what am I? What are you doing here? Shinjoli's voice was cold and emotionless. He didn't answer Ning Xuema's question. I came to sincerely consult the ancestor on a matter. Ning Xuema opened her mouth, her eyes firmly staring at him. I asked the ancestor to answer. What is it? The Dizun really wants to marry this Miss Lizine. This question was direct and sharp. Ning Xuema didn't beat around the bush. Although everything had proven her judgment, she still wanted to hear it from his own mouth. Only when she heard it from his own mouth would she be willing to completely give up. Shinjoli paused for a moment. Before he could say anything, Lizine, who was beside him, said, Brother D will definitely marry me. We are now engaged. Then, she grabbed Shinjoli's arm possessively. D brother. What a mushy name. So there would be a day when this great god would be called brother by a woman. Ning Xuema's gaze landed on their intertwined arms. That place used to be hers alone, but now, Shinjoli was a clean freak. Usually, he wouldn't allow anyone to get close to him. Only she could get close to him. Right now, he was holding his fiancée in the crook of his arm. She was mentally prepared. She was here to end everything. She thought she could accept whatever she saw. But when he held someone else's hand, her heart still tightened. Chapter 1444. Her heart tightened inch by inch in her chest, as if it was being pricked by a row of needles. Her hands and feet felt cold, but her expression did not change. Her face was calm, as if she had turned a blind eye to his intimacy with someone else. She did not care about Lizine. She only wanted to hear it from Shinjoli personally. She would only believe it if he said it to her personally. When she asked this question, her heart tightened again as if she was drowning. This was her last hope. Although this hope was like a candle in the wind that could be extinguished at any time, she still did not want to give up. Shinjoli did not say anything. At such a distance, she could not see his eyes clearly. She could only see that his thin lips were tightly pursed. She steeled her heart and asked again, Ancestor, is this question very hard to answer? Today, she must get an answer. Even if this answer threw her into a bottomless abyss, she still wanted to confirm it. If she wanted to despair, then she would completely despair. She was also tired of being left hanging like this. Although she was wearing a veil and people could not see her face clearly, her expression and figure were the same as before, without any change. Especially that pair of eyes, which could captivate people's souls. If people were not careful, they would fall into her eyes and be consigned to eternal damnation. Shinjoli's eyes darkened as he said lightly, It has nothing to do with you. In just a few words, he had clearly cut off all ties between them and severed all ties. Ning Xuemo smiled. Her smile made her eyes look like crescent moons. Everyone suddenly felt that although this Miss Ning was wearing a veil, her aura, figure and appearance were not inferior to that of Lizine, who was recently crowned as the #1 beauty in Tianxi continent. Especially this smile, which caused everyone's heart to tremble and tremble. Very good. Ning Xuemo softly spat out these 2 words. Although he did not directly answer her, that sentence had clearly expressed his attitude. Her fate with him would end here. When a person made a decision, their heart would be calm. She took a step back and slightly bowed. It has nothing to do with me indeed. Forgive me for asking. I wish Dizun and Miss Lo to grow old together and be in love forever. Shinjiuli's eyes darkened. He placed his hand on the armrest, and his sleeve covered his white fingertips. Are you here to congratulate us? Lizine stared at Ning Xuemo's dress. Your dress is very special. It looks like a dancer's dress. These words were filled with malice. Many of the people present were frequenters of the brothel, so they naturally knew what kind of clothes the dancers wore. Indeed, it was similar to what Ning Xuemo was wearing at this moment, but it was not as exquisite as what she was wearing now. Hearing Lizine's words, many people laughed along with her. A straightforward person said loudly, a demoness is a demoness. Even wearing such immoral clothes. He didn't finish his sentence because the ancestor looked at him. The ancestor's gaze was extremely cold, causing the man's heart to tremble violently, and the blood in his body almost froze. He couldn't continue speaking. Shinjiuli's gaze turned back to Ning Xuemo. He deliberately avoided looking at her eye-catching dress, so as to not lose control and throw her or everyone present out. Have you said what you wanted to say? That's all. Then you can leave. I can go now. This was an order for her to leave. Yes, she would leave. But, not now. Ning Xuemo raised her eyebrows and smiled. She had been smiling since she came in. Chapter 1445. Xuemo came here in a hurry and didn't prepare any gifts for the engagement of the ancestor and this lady. It's quite rude of me. How about I dance for you as a gift? Shinjiuli's expression changed slightly. He was about to say something when Lizine interrupted. Okay. Brother D, there should be singing and dancing at the engagement banquet to liven things up. It's also good to let Miss Ning dance a song. Everyone knew that Shinjiuli doted on Lizine very much. He listened to whatever she said. At this time, fawning on Lizine was the same as fawning on the ancestor. Many people echoed, okay. It's also good to dance a song. It's the ancestor's engagement banquet. With a witch singing and dancing to liven things up, it'll be a good story. That's right, Helian Xiao had been in a daze since the moment Ning Xuemo appeared. At this moment, he finally regained his senses. Seeing that everyone was mocking Ning Xuemo, the anger in his heart surged. He couldn't help but jump in front of Ning Xuemo. Xuemo, you don't have to ruin yourself like this. Come with me. He didn't care about anything else and pulled Ning Xuemo's hand to leave. Whether she was a witch or not, he couldn't bear to see her suffer any grievances. He felt that he was going to explode from anger. He knew that Ning Xuemo's 10 years of marriage was a taboo in the sect. He knew that those who violated this taboo would be punished. He also knew that it was very shocking for him to pull her away in front of everyone today. He might be expelled from the sect and hunted down. For example, when he held Ning Xuemo's hand, he felt that the ancestor's gaze was on him. Although he didn't turn around to look, his sixth sense told him that the ancestor's gaze was definitely not friendly. But he couldn't care less. She was the most beautiful lady in his heart. Seeing her being humiliated was more unbearable and angrier than him being humiliated. He only wanted to bring her away from here safely. As soon as he took her hand and took a step forward, his hand was held by Ning Xuemo. Lian Xiao, thank you. Ning Xuemo's whisper drifted into his ears. Then, he felt his body become light as he flew into the air. In the blink of an eye, he flew back to the chair he had been sitting on. Lian Xiao. He felt like he was dreaming. It turned out that she had already seen him. Otherwise, she wouldn't have known that he was originally sitting on this chair. The warmth of his butt was still on this chair. Sheng, sheng, sheng. The sound of a pipa rang out. Ning Xuemo no longer paid any attention to Shinjiuli's gaze on the stage. Her fingers plucked the strings of the pipa and began to play. The song she was playing was the one she had played in the vast Sky Country's imperial palace that day. After a few notes were played, it was as if everyone's heartstrings were being played. Everyone's heart felt as if ice water was flowing through it. The sound of the pipa was too clear and pleasing to the ears. Many people in the hall originally wanted to see Ning Xuemo make a fool of herself. But after being shocked by the sound of the pipa, they couldn't bear to make a sound so as not to interrupt the heavenly sound of the pipa. Following the sound of the pipa, a picture scroll seemed to unfold in front of everyone's eyes. The boundless yellow sand stretched as far as the eye could see. The sound of the camel bell could be heard as the travelers gradually walked closer and further away under the setting sun. An ancient castle appeared in the anxiety of the travelers. The travelers cheered as they entered the castle, only to see modeled murals everywhere in the castle. On the murals, there were beautiful fairies dancing in circles with pipa in their hands. Following the beautiful fairies' dance, the dark castle regained its vitality. Oasis after oasis appeared in the vast desert. There were sweet rivers flowing, green grasses, and delicate flowers swaying in the wind. Chapter 1446. The more the stunning female immortal danced, the more anxious she became. The sound of the pipa also shook everyone's heartstrings more and more. Everyone was intoxicated by the music, forgetting where they were. Many people couldn't help but start to follow the rhythm of the pipa. Those who understood music even started to hum in their hearts. The big red dress spun in the air, the red muslin covering the entire hall, like a red spider lily spreading out on the road to the yellow springs, shocking everyone's eyes. The woman in red with black hair and a slender waist, holding the pipa and dancing was like a burning flame, like a witch of fire who had fallen into the mortal world. Whose eyes would light up? Shinjiuli's fingers held the wine cup tightly, his thin lips tightly pursed. He vaguely felt like he had seen this scene before. Was this the scene he saw before he lost his memories? What did she come here for? Where did Shui Lan die? She and Shui Lan disappeared together for 10 years. 10 years. Just when he thought that she would never appear again, she finally came back and appeared so abruptly at his engagement party. What did she want? What was her purpose this time? Shui Emo, since you've already chosen him, since you've chosen to be together with him, why did you come back? Looking for an opportunity to stab him again. Shui Emo, if a person falls once, it's pardonable, but falling twice is stupid. Do you think this lord will fall a third time? This time, this lord won't be fooled by you. He was very clear in his heart, but her dress made him angry for no reason. He spent a lot of effort to resist throwing her out. Only then did he manage to hold himself back from waving all the guests away with his sleeves. He sat on the chair, watching her, watching as she danced more and more frantically. The sound of the pipa broke, and the red dress fluttered. That touch of red spun in the hall, attracting everyone's attention. She kicked her legs and bent her waist. The pipa in her arms was sometimes slanted and sometimes flew horizontally. Her snow-white and soft fingers were plucking on the surface of the pipa. The wind from her sleeves blew up the robes of the guests she passed by. The veil on her face rose and fell with her dance, making her peerless beauty faintly discernible. She was like a flaming butterfly, as if she was bidding farewell to the past, as if she was going to be reborn from the ashes. She possessed an extremely shocking strength. At this moment, whether it was the sect master of a cultivation sect or the monarch of a continent, they all forgot the identity of the woman in front of them. They even forgot that she was dancing. They looked at her with eyes full of fanaticism, as if a devout believer had seen their Lord. No one thought that she dressed casually anymore. No one thought that she looked like a dancer anymore. It was as if she was born to dress like this and dance like this. Shawing. A sound similar to the sound of silk tearing pulled everyone's minds back from the fluttering pipa music. Everyone quivered and woke up from their daze. Where was the yellow sand, the oasis, the travelers, and the light flight? They were still in the hall, and Ning Xuema was standing on the red carpet. Her dress did not move. She had already stopped moving. She finished playing just like that. They hadn't heard enough yet. Everyone couldn't wait for her to play another song. Everyone's eyes couldn't help but focus on her. Ning Xuema lowered her eyes. Her fingers fell on the strings of the pipa. Suddenly, she smiled gently and raised her head. From the pipa we formed fate, and from the pipa we scattered fate. Soon, the fate between you and me ends here. Shinjioli's expression changed. He suddenly stood up. You. Chapter 1447. Ning Xuema's 10 fingers suddenly moved, and with a loud zhing sound, all the strings of the pipa broke. The surface of the pipa that was made of jade also broke into several pieces. Such an exquisite pipa was actually destroyed by her. The sound of the pipa breaking was like a heavy blow to Shinjioli's heart. His face turned pale, as if some kind of fate had been completely broken along with the pipa, and could no longer be pieced back together. Soon, I wish you and this girl to grow old together, and never leave each other. Ning Xuema's clear and cold voice resounded in the hall, ringing in everyone's ears. After saying this sentence, she no longer looked at Shinjioli and turned around to leave. The moment the pipa broke, her heart also seemed to break. That pipa was given to her by Shinjioli in the past. He said that her playing of the pipa was very good, but she lacked a good instrument, so he picked this one out from his storage space. He also said that in the future, she would only play the pipa for him to hear and dance for him to see. Since she obtained this instrument, she had always hidden it in the deepest part of her storage space like a treasure, and would not take it out easily. She only played it once in a while in front of him. She clearly remembered that after she finished playing, she raised her red face and proudly asked him how he felt. At that time, he did not speak, but directly pulled her into his arms and threw her down on the cushion at his feet. That time, the two of them kissed so intensely that they almost had an accident. From then on, the Dizun gave her another order. Without his permission, she was not allowed to dance or play this song. He was afraid that he would not be able to control himself, no matter if it was her or him. This pipa occupied a large part of their hearts. Now, the only one who had that memory was her, and he had already forgotten it completely. The past was like poisonous wine, pouring on her heart. The more intoxicated it was, the more painful it was now. Now, he was about to become someone else's fiancé, and had nothing to do with her. She would use this dance to end it. She would use this pipa to end this ill-fated relationship. She left decisively, and did not look back. Stop. Shinjioli finally opened his mouth and clenched his fists within his wide sleeves. Although he didn't remember the past and didn't even remember the pipa, seeing her destroy the pipa made him feel extremely uncomfortable. Ning Xuema turned a deaf ear to her. What should be ended had already been ended. There was no need for her to stay here any longer. Shuimo. He called out her old name. Ning Shuimo's footsteps didn't even stop. Her heart was filled with sorrow. So in his eyes, she was still Shuimo, and never Ning Shuimo, but Shuimo was already dead. How could she still exist in this world? Besides, Shuimo had already used her death to pay off all the debts she owed him. Why did she have to bear the debts of her previous life? She didn't owe him anything. No matter if it was her previous life or this life, she no longer owed him anything. Shuimo. He called out again. Her back view as she straightened her back and left was like a lonely peerless knife that cut across his heart and stung his eyes. He called her by her previous life's name. Even he didn't know what he wanted to do. Or was it to remind her, and also to remind himself? Ning Shuimo finally slowly turned her head, her gaze falling on him. Your Excellency, I think I need to say something. I am Ning Shuimo. Not Shuimo. The previous life is the previous life, and this life is this life. Please don't confuse the previous life with the current one. I also don't need to bear the debts of my previous life. She laughed again. It was hard to say whether it was a smile of ridicule or something else. Also, no matter if it's the previous life or this life, I no longer owe you anything. Chapter 1448. After saying this, she didn't look at him again and turned to leave. The red carpet under her feet was soft and fragrant, but her heart was cold. The little baby in her belly suddenly woke up and kicked her in the belly a few times, causing her to stagger slightly. However, she immediately straightened her body and strode towards the door. Blood surged in her chest, and heat rose in her eyes. It was so painful to break a wrist. It was so painful to tear a person from the heart. It was so painful that her stomach felt bitter, and her eyes felt sour. She was miserable, but she didn't want anyone to see her weakness at this time. Therefore, she forcefully suppressed the boiling blood in her chest and walked steadily, decisively, and without any hesitation. Shinjuli stood there, his robe fluttering without wind. He opened his mouth as if he wanted to say something, but seemed to have thought of something. His eyes dimmed, and he didn't say anything. Just like that, he watched her walk down the red carpet step by step and out of his line of sight. Everyone was stunned, and no one could speak. Everyone present was a shrewd person. When they saw the undercurrent between Ning Shuimo and Shinjuli, they seemed to have understood something. However, they did not dare to reveal the truth. Ning Shuimo was the demon emperor of the demon realm, and she was also the ancestor's disciple. Everyone knew this. However, no one expected that the ancestor and Ning Shuimo had such a relationship that caused people's imaginations to roam. The ancestor slowly sat down, and the aura around him seemed to be colder. It was so cold that it made the originally bustling hall feel a few degrees colder. These righteous people watched Ning Shuimo, the demon emperor, disappear into the distance, but no one dared to sneak an attack on her. First, they might not succeed. Second, they didn't dare to act rashly in front of the ancestor. Acting rashly at this time was simply going against the ancestor. Everyone was smart, so they didn't provoke the tiger's whiskers. But now that things had developed to this point, should the engagement banquet still proceed? After all, there were still a few steps left, and it wasn't considered complete yet. Everyone's gaze turned to Luzine's face, wanting to see how she would react. Luzine coughed and smiled. She stood up and said, "No matter what, I have to thank Miss Ning for giving me such a good gift." She wrapped her fingers around Shinjuli's sleeve. "Brother D, why don't we continue?" Ning Shuimo did not encounter any obstacles along the way, and just like that, she walked out of the Solomon's sacred hall. No one chased after them. Or rather, no one dared to chase after them without a venerable emperor speaking. Of course, Shinjiuli did not chase after him. He did not even stand up. After walking out of the main hall, she felt as if all the strength in her body had been sucked out. She swayed slightly, and her legs felt weak. She didn't want to leave anymore, so she simply soared into the sky and rushed out of the barrier above Buddha Lotus Mountain, heading down the mountain as fast as lightning. Just as she reached the foot of the mountain, she suddenly heard a thunderclap in the sky. The sound was earth-shattering, and Ning Xuema, who had just landed on the ground, was shocked. She subconsciously raised her head to look up, and was stunned. Purple clouds were gathering crazily in the sky, and they were gathering towards the southeast. Suddenly, a purple lightning struck the ground, and the sound of thunder was earth-shattering. What is this? Is it going through a tribulation? Ning Xuema opened her eyes wide, and tried hard to look in that direction. That direction was where the Sun Moon sect's main hall was located. Chapter 1449. That direction was where the main hall of the Sun Moon sect was located. She suddenly realized something, and her expression changed again. In the modern era, she had chatted with Hua Baoyue, the fox deity. She remembered telling her that Shinjiuli was a god, but when they were together, he never said anything about marrying her, which made her quite depressed. At that time, Hua Baoyue had said that usually, when people of high status married, they would disturb the heavens, and the heavens would send down divine lightning to the woman who was about to be made empress. It was called the calamity of the god empress. After Hua Baoyue said this, she suspected that this was the reason why Shinjiuli didn't say anything about marrying her. She wanted to find him and ask him in detail. Ask him if this was the reason why he didn't promise to marry her, but waited until she cultivated to Earth rank level 8. This time, due to the mishap, she didn't have the chance to ask him. Even if she asked him, he might not be able to tell her what he thought before he lost his memory. Now, she saw this. Hua Baoyue had said that the divine lightning of the calamity of God was different from normal lightning. It was gold or purple. What she was looking at right now was purple. Could this be the calamity of the god empress? If that was the case, their engagement ceremony had been completed, right? Just as she thought of this, she saw a white light rising from the direction of the lightning. That white light directly met the lightning that was striking down, emitting an even more glaring light and an even more deafening sound. Then, she saw a water-red figure rise into the sky as if it was being pulled by something, and a white figure followed suit. Although they were far away, and although the two figures were just the size of pellets in her eyes, she still recognized them. The water-red figure was Lizine, and the white figure was Shinjiuli. Shinjiuli was obviously protecting Lizine. When the purple lightning struck down, he was the first to wave his sleeves to block it, so most of the purple lightning struck his body, and only the aftershocks landed on Lizine. Amidst the flashes of lightning and thunder, cries of surprise could be heard. Clearly, the people there did not know about the god empress tribulation and were all shocked. Ning Xuema slowly leaned against a big tree and sat down. She hugged her knees and looked at the two people in the sky who were going through their tribulation side by side. She stared without blinking until her eyes were sore and swollen, but she still didn't move. Shinjiuli protected Lizine very well. There were a total of 12 bolts of lightning that struck down, but they were all blocked by him. Lizine curled up beside his feet and followed him closely. Not a single bolt of lightning hit her directly. The purple clouds that filled the sky slowly dispersed, and the sky returned to its previous clear state. The sun once again revealed a fiery smile as it looked down at the myriad of living beings beneath its feet. Ning Xuema didn't even blink as she watched the two of them slowly descend together. In the end, she could no longer see their shadows. She blinked and blinked again. Her eyes were probably sore from staring at the sky for too long. Tears flowed from the corners of her eyes and fell into the grass at her feet. So be it. She told herself that she had seen them go through the God-Empress tribulation together with her own eyes. She had witnessed everything with her own eyes. What else was there to doubt? From now on, she would really cut off all ties with him. Forgetting about each other in the martial world might be the best ending for both of them. She wanted to stand up, but her legs were already sore, so she couldn't stand up for a moment. She raised her hand to wipe her eyes and then wiped away some water. Chapter 1450. As she sat there, she felt as if she had stepped on empty air and couldn't find the shore. Where would she go in the future? There seemed to be no place for her in this world anymore. If she had known this earlier, she wouldn't have transmigrated back. No, she still had to come back. After all, her little darling couldn't adapt to the climate there. No matter what, nothing could happen to her little darling. She couldn't help but caress her stomach. Darling, Mommy only has you. Tell me, where should we go? Her baby seemed to have understood her whispers, and gave her face by using his little butt to puff up, right under her palm. It was a very slight movement, but it warmed her heart. No matter what, her darling didn't abandon her. She still had him. In the future, it would be born and become either him or her. He would hold her hand and call her Mommy. It would be a pretty, soft, and tender little milk bun. Thinking of her child, she seemed to have regained her strength. She slowly stood up and walked down the mountain, towards the unknown future. She wanted to find a place to rest for a while. Once she had recovered enough energy, she would leave the continent and go somewhere else. Right now, her whole body was weak and her body was alternating between hot and cold. She wasn't in a good state. And to pass through the spatial gate, she needed to have sufficient strength. Reporting to Guild Master, Miss Ning has already gone down the mountain and is now heading towards Sunset City. The disciple who followed her reported. Continue to follow her. Remember, don't let her discover you. If there's any movement, immediately report back. Yellow Jing and instructed. Yes. The voice transmission talisman was extinguished. Yellow Jing and rubbed his forehead in frustration. Just now, when Luzien's heavenly lightning tribulation arrived, before his master flew up to block the tribulation for her, he quickly sent a message to him. He told him to send someone to follow Ning Xuema and that they must not lose her. If they lost her, they would be beheaded. The ancestors' instructions had always been concise and to the point. This was the first time he said such a long sentence and used such a strict tone. Yellow Jing and was originally worried about Ning Xuema and was about to secretly send someone to follow and protect her. Hearing his master's instructions, it was exactly what he wanted. He immediately arranged for the disciples of the Sun Moon sect who were best at tracking to follow Ning Xuema. This disciple was indeed very skilled. He quickly found Ning Xuema's whereabouts and quickly reported back. Sunset City was a city to the north of the Buddha Lotus Mountain. It was over 200 miles away from the Buddha Lotus Mountain. It was a rather poor small city. Their products were barren, and they were so poor that only jingling sounds could be heard. The disciples of the Sun Moon sect wouldn't go there to purchase daily necessities. What is Ning Xuema's intention for going there? Di Zun's thoughts were hard to guess, but his junior sister's thoughts were even harder to guess. Yellow Jing and was lost in thought for a moment. She shook her head and thought for a moment. She took out the special sound-transmitting talisman and used a spell to connect. The other side picked up almost immediately. What's the matter? The voice was cold as usual. Master, junior sister. No, Miss Ning went to Luoxia City. She walked there on her own. She didn't ride a flying sword. She also didn't see anyone following her. Yellow Jing and told everything he knew. The other side didn't respond for a long time. Yilu Jing and held her breath and waited. After a moment, 3 words came from the other side. Continue to follow. Yilu Jing and heaved a sigh of relief. Worried about his master's injuries, she asked, Master, how are you now? Why don't you let me come to serve you? Chapter 1451. Yilu Jing and heaved a sigh of relief. She was worried about her master's injury. Master, how are you now? Why don't I come over to serve you? No need. Yilu Jing and only said these 2 words and then hung up. Yilu Jing and sighed and put away the voice-transmitting talisman. Her master withstood 12 bolts of lightning by himself in front of everyone and went into seclusion right after he landed. Before he went into seclusion, he asked his female disciple to take care of Lu Ziyin, who was also a little injured. Therefore, he didn't meet the guests again. Yilu Jing and was the only one who suffered. She still had to appease the people and send them away. She also had to deal with the tedious follow-up work. Although she had thought things through and set a goal for the future. After such a heavy blow, Ning Xuemo still couldn't bear it. After she came to Luoxia City, she found that she had a tendency to have a high fever. Her high fever was different from others. When others had a high fever, their faces would be as white as a ghost or as red as the sun. They would also walk with unsteady steps. However, she wasn't like that. Her body was obviously cold, but her small face was pink and red. She walked very steadily and even looked a little light. Nothing could be seen from her appearance. She touched her forehead. Her hand was cold, but her forehead was burning hot. She felt that the air she exhaled was also steam. She had a high fever. It didn't matter if she had a fever, but she couldn't burn the baby. Now, the baby in her belly was her only spiritual support. If something happened to the baby, she really didn't have the courage to live. Fortunately, she was a doctor. After she arrived at Luoxia City, she immediately found an inn to stay. She knew that she shouldn't take medicine when she was pregnant. In those days in the modern world, she crammed a lot of knowledge on pregnant women and knew that many cold medicines were harmful to the baby. In this era, although she knew that some medicines were safe, she didn't know if they would harm the baby. She didn't dare to take the risk. Therefore, after she noticed that she had a high fever, her first reaction was to lower her temperature physically and use her spiritual power to drive the heat away. This city was very poor, and there were very few outsiders who came here. Therefore, the inns in this city were also shabby, and they didn't have enough things. When Ning Xuemo asked for a bathtub, the shop assistant ran out to buy it at the last minute. Fortunately, he managed to buy it in time. Ning Xuemo was already a little dizzy from the fever. She sent the waiter out and closed the door. Her body trembled as she stepped into the bathtub filled with warm water. Sure enough, the water in the bathtub took away some of the heat from her body, and her mind cleared up a little. Actually, she was still a little regretful. If she had known that she would fall ill, she wouldn't have come to this godforsaken place. The reason why he had chosen to come here at that time was because he had taken a fancy to the fact that no one would come here easily. He wouldn't bump into the other disciples of the Sun-Moon sect, so as to avoid any awkwardness. She had originally planned to rest here for 2 days before leaving. Who would have thought that this illness would come so fiercely? Damn it, wasn't she already at Earth rank level 9? How did she become Little Sister Lin? You'll get sick just by being blown by the wind. She had a high fever, but her body was cold. In order to reduce her fever quickly, she made the water in the bathtub warm. It was about the same temperature as the surface of her body. Normally, she would feel comfortable soaking in such bathwater. But now, because her skin was much warmer than the bathwater, she felt as if she was sitting in ice water. She was so cold that she shivered and her teeth chattered. Chapter 1452. She closed her eyes and endured the discomfort. She let her psychokinesis circulate in her body and forced the heat out little by little. Maybe it was because she was too tired, or maybe the high fever made her head a little dizzy, but she actually fell asleep while she was adjusting her breath. She only woke up when her body slipped into the water and accidentally choked on the water. She quickly popped her head out of the water with her heart beating wildly. That mouthful of water made her feel like she was drowning again. Her whole body was stiff. After taking a deep breath, she suddenly felt that the dizziness was much lighter. She touched her forehead and felt that it was not so hot anymore. She heaved a sigh of relief. The baby in her stomach suddenly kicked a few times. She used her inner vision to look and saw that it was kicking and punching happily inside. It seemed to have grown in size as well. It seemed that the little guy had finally started to grow after returning to this world. She stayed in this inn for 3 days. In these 3 days, her high fever would recur. She used 3 methods: massage, physical cooling, and psychokinesis to drive the heat away. After 3 days, the high fever finally subsided completely. She had a lot of enemies in this world, and there were also a lot of people who wanted her dead. Therefore, when she was staying in this inn, although she lived in seclusion, every time she went out, she would try her best to make herself look more energetic so that no one could see through her, not to mention outsiders. Even the inn's manager did not know about her illness. They only knew that this girl liked to soak in the bath water 3 or 4 times a day. On this day, she finally felt that she had some appetite. The food in this inn was really hard to swallow. A few days ago, she felt so uncomfortable that she tried not to go out. Now that she had regained her mobility, she could no longer hold it in. She walked out and wanted to find the best restaurant to have a meal. The small town was poor. The small town was really poor. She walked from one end of the small town to the other and did not find a decent restaurant. It was either tattered or dirty. Not to mention eating, just looking at it made her feel disgusted. The little guy in her stomach started to kick and punch again, as if protesting that he was hungry for so long. Well, she should find a decent city. At least she could have a few more good meals. Due to this serious illness, her skills had decreased by a lot. Her sword was also trembling a little. When she was flying in the air, her body was slightly swaying. Fortunately, she did not fall and embarrass herself. She disappeared in the air like a wisp of smoke. The disciples of the Sun-Moon sect who had been following her in secret were dumbfounded on the ground. Although his tracking skills were unparalleled, he had yet to learn how to fly. I can't follow him anymore. Thinking about it, he immediately reported to Yelu Jing'an. These few days, he would report to Yelu Jing and every day, and it was the kind of report that involved no matter how big or small. Even Ning Xuemo said clearly how many buckets of bathing water she asked for and how many steamed buns she ate every day. Yelu Jing and paused for a moment, then ordered the disciple to continue searching in the direction Ning Xuemo had gone. The disciple obeyed the order and left. Yelu Jing and actually had a bit of a headache. The current Ning Xuemo wasn't easy to follow. She could fly. Once she took off, she would disappear in the blink of an eye. Those spies of the Sun-Moon sect who could fly were few and far between, and it just so happened that they were not on Buddha Lotus Mountain. The people he could send were too few. Only those who had cultivated to the 6.5 level of the Earth realm could practice the sword technique. Even in the Sun-Moon sect, there weren't many who could reach this level. And these people were mostly hall masters, not spies. Chapter 1453. Master's task was the most important. On the surface, Master was extremely cold towards Ning Xuemo, but he was also extremely attentive. Every day, he would use the sound transmission talisman to report Ning Xuemo's matters to Master. Although Master didn't say anything, he had never interrupted him. Even when he nagged about how Ning Xuemo ate a few steamed buns today, Master didn't find him annoying, and when he reported other matters to Master, if he was a little long-winded, Master would immediately tell him, "Get to the point." He didn't even dare to say a word of nonsense about those matters. He had to desperately organize his words before reporting them. Master was in seclusion to recover. Yellow Jing and also tried his best not to disturb him. Most of the matters were settled by himself. Ning Xuemo's matter was as important as the sky. If it wasn't for the fact that Yellow Jing and couldn't leave, he might as well go by himself. He thought for a moment and decided to summon a hall master over to let him follow Ning Xuemo. Just as he walked out of the door, he saw Helian Xiao standing outside the door. Helian Xiao's eyes were fixed on him, giving Yellow Jing an affright. This disciple was passionate and candid towards others. He hated evil as if they were his enemies. Furthermore, he was extremely talented. In these 20 years, his cultivation had already reached Earth rank grade 8 and was advancing towards grade 9. He had become the role model of the new generation of disciples in the Sun-Moon sect. Yellow Jing and was still very satisfied with this disciple. The only thing he wasn't satisfied with was that this kid seemed to be somewhat obsessed with Ning Xuemo. They had already reached the age where they should have gotten married long ago, but he used the excuse that he had to concentrate on his cultivation and had no time to care about love affairs. 10 years before Ning Xuemo went missing, Helian Xiao, who had always stayed in the mountains and cultivated bitterly, liked to go out and train. Once he left, he wouldn't return for a few months. Later on, news of Ning Xuemo's death spread. They even obtained her corpse and buried her. When Helian Xiao heard the news and returned, he was dispirited for a long time. Suddenly, he stopped going out and resumed his cultivation in the mountains. However, Ning Xuemo's grave would have someone secretly sprinkling flowers and sweeping flowers every day. Yellow Jing and felt puzzled and secretly investigated a few times. Finally, she discovered that it was this brat who came to Ning Xuemo's grave every night to busy himself. Occasionally, he would carry a wine jug and drink while talking to the people in the grave. When he got drunk, he would sit there and cry. It was only then that Yellow Jing and realized that this disciple of his was so obsessed with Ning Xuemo. When he said he was going out to train, it was probably to find someone. Later, when Ning Xuemo was rescued by the ancestor, he was also the happiest person. That night, he dug up Ning Xuemo's grave and even kicked the coffin a few times, saying that it made him cry in front of a strange person for 10 years. Later on, for some reason, Ning Xuemo entered the devil world and left the Sun-Moon sect. This brat probably didn't believe that Ning Xuemo would enter the devil world and secretly ran to the devil world a few times. There were a few times when he was almost caught and skinned by the people of the devil world. Fortunately, his martial arts were high and he ran fast, so he was lucky to escape. However, he was also seriously injured once and almost lost his life. If Yellow Jing and didn't find him in time and bring him back to treat his injuries, he might have already become a pile of bones in the devil world. After Ning Xuemo went missing for 10 years, his master seemed to have been heartbroken. He ordered all the disciples of the Sun-Moon sect not to search for her again. Those who disobeyed would be killed without mercy. At that time, Yellow Jing and was most worried about this troublesome disciple of his. He was afraid that he would go against the ancestors' order and secretly investigate again. Thus, he simply found a reason to punish him to a place with abundant spiritual energy in the back mountains and shut him in. He made him concentrate on cultivating there and couldn't come out without his master's orders. Chapter 1454. Yellow Jing and was afraid that he would run away, so he personally set up a barrier near the back mountain and checked it every day to ensure that nothing would go wrong. Fortunately, this kid was a good seedling for martial arts. He probably knew that he couldn't run away from confinement, so he worked hard to cultivate. In 10 years, his psychokinesis also rose from level 7 to level 8, because there were many people coming to the ancestors' engagement banquet, including this kid's father, Yellow Jing, and let him out to let the father and son meet. But he didn't expect that Ning Xuemo, who had been missing for 10 years without any news, would suddenly appear. And this kid actually dared to risk universal condemnation and run away with Ning Xuemo. This made Yellow Jing and sweat for his disciple. He was afraid that the ancestor would turn this kid into dregs in anger. After the disturbance at the engagement banquet, the ancestor immediately went into seclusion and didn't have time to deal with this kid. Yellow Jing and was also busy and forgot about him for a while. Now that he saw him standing outside his door, the veins on Yellow Jing and's forehead suddenly popped out in joy. Right now, it was already chaotic enough. This kid wouldn't want to add more chaos, right? Master, I want to go down the mountain. This was Helian Zhao's first sentence when he saw Yellow Jing and. You're not allowed. Yellow Jing and refused without thinking. He could guess what was going on even if he used his toes to guess. Master, I must go down the mountain. Helian Zhao's tone was firm. Master said, you're not allowed. Yellow Jing An's tone was impatient, itching to kick this good-for-nothing disciple away. He was too lazy to talk nonsense with him and walked out in large strides. He still had many things to do. How could he have the time to tangle with this kid? Master, I know she's already taken. I know she doesn't have that kind of feeling towards me. I don't have any other thoughts towards her now. I only see her as a friend. A true friend. She's outside alone now, and with that kind of reputation, I'm afraid someone will harm her. I only want to go to her side and protect her. Helian Zhao spoke from behind him and said each word seriously, really, I only want to protect her. Even if it's secretly protecting her. Yellow Jing An's footsteps paused. He slowly turned around and sized him up. You mean what you say? Helian Zhao didn't expect his master to relent so quickly. His eyes immediately lit up as he said loudly, keep your word. What if you're the only one allowed to protect her from the shadows? That works too. But what if she encounters great danger and I have to show myself to help her? Helian Zhao agreed to his master's conditions, but he also raised an objection. If you find any signs of her being in danger, report it immediately. There was no room for delay. If there really is such a special situation, it won't be too late for you to show yourself. Yes. Helian Zhao answered loudly and turned around to leave. Wait. Yellow Jing and gave him a special sound-transmitting talisman. She's currently on her way to Phoenix City, you can go look for her. Remember, you are not allowed to mention this mission to anyone. You have to report her situation twice a day. Remember, everything. There must be no mistakes. Helian Zhao's eyes widened. Master, the Sun Moon sect is monitoring her. Why? Yellow Jing An's expression chilled. Since you've received a mission, you should complete it excellently. Why are you asking so many questions? If you don't want to do it. I'm willing. I'm willing. Helian Zhao was afraid that he would go back on his word. Master, then I'll go now. He snatched the sound-transmitting talisman and disappeared in a flash. Chapter 1455. Yellow Jing and was speechless. This disciple of his was really impatient. However, it was good to let him go. Helian Zhao had always been talkative. He didn't even need to ask when he sent back the news. He wasn't like the other scout disciples, whose words were terrifyingly concise and dry. He didn't have much to report to his master. Every time he reported news about Ning Xuema to his master, he had to rack his brains to say more. Even so, his master would always ask, "That's all?" At the end. It was obvious that he hadn't heard enough, which made him feel guilty. Helian Xiao was skilled and daring. With him secretly protecting Ning Xuema and constantly sending news, there shouldn't be any accidents. Yilu Jing and was finally relieved. He turned around to arrange other matters. He lingered outside for a while, and only returned after he had finished dealing with all the miscellaneous matters. Just as he walked to his door, a graceful lady appeared. Jing En. Yilu Jing and took a step back and bowed. Exalted Immortal Lu. That lady was Lu Xin. She wore a purple robe today and looked as if she could fly. She was as fresh as a dewy purple pearl. Jing En, you don't have to be so polite. You can just call me Xin. Lu Xin smiled, making people happy. I don't dare. Is Exalted Immortal Lu feeling better now? Yilu Jing and asked respectfully. He had always been respectful towards this lady. After all, she was the most likely person to become his master's wife. Lu Xin spun around, her robe fluttering. I'm almost recovered. Her beautiful eyes landed on Yilu Jing and. How is your master now? Yilu Jing and replied, Master is recovering. You don't have to worry about him. Master will be very happy if he knows that you are fully recovered. Lu Xin sighed. It's all thanks to your master that he blocked the lightning tribulation for me. That's why he's so heavily injured. I feel really bad about it, and I really want to see him. Yilu Jing and said, Thank you for thinking about my master. He's in seclusion and probably can't see anyone. You can just wait for 2 more days. Lu Xin, on the other hand, was a magnanimous person. She sighed softly and said, I understand. During the recovery period, one cannot be disturbed by external matters. I'll see him in a few days. It's the same. Thank you for your understanding, Fairy. Yilu Jing An's reply was watertight. Fairy's body is still slightly unwell, why don't you return to the courtyard to rest? Just let the disciples tell you what you need. There's no need for you to come here personally. Luzi chuckled, Jing'an, you're too polite. The disciples you sent are all pretty good and serve me very attentively. I didn't come looking for you to ask for anything. I want to go out for a while. Yilu Jing'an was stunned. Ever since Fairy Lu came to the Sun-Moon sect on Buddha Lotus Mountain, she rarely went out. Even if she went out, it was with her master. Now she wanted to go out alone. Logically speaking, she was an honored guest of the Sun-Moon sect, so she could come and go as she pleased. In fact, she didn't even need to report to anyone. But Master treasured her so much that he even blocked the lightning bolt for her. If she went out alone and something happened, he wouldn't be able to bear the consequences. Fairy, is there something urgent? Why don't you go with Master after he comes out of seclusion? Lu Xin shook her head lightly. There's no need. I'm looking for medicine for your master this time. I know a medicine that's very beneficial for lightning strike injuries. Chapter 1456. Yilu Jing'an's eyes lit up. What kind of medicine is that? Where is it grown? You can let your disciple pick it. Lu Xin smiled. That place can only be visited by those whose psychokinesis has reached the first level of the heaven realm. Moreover, the person who needs to pick the medicine is also selected. Only our Jade Water Fox clan can go there. Yilu Jing'an asked. Is there any risk? Of course there is a little risk, but it's not a big problem. I've been there twice before and am familiar with it. There won't be any problems. I wanted to go earlier, but my body didn't allow it. Now that I've recovered, I must go this time. Luzine's tone was resolute. Then Fairy can discuss it with my master, no need. He loves me dearly and can't bear to let me take any risks. If he knows, he will definitely stop me. He has done so much for me, so it's only right that I do one or two things for him. So I won't discuss it with him. When I come back with the medicine, he won't be able to do anything. Luzine smiled sweetly. All right, it's enough that you know about this. I'll go now. She turned and floated up. Then can Fairy tell me where to go? Cloudgrass Forbidden Land. Luzine threw down these 4 words and disappeared. Yellow Jing and had a feeling that something wasn't right, but after thinking about it, he couldn't figure out what was wrong. He shook his head and decided that if this fairy didn't return in 2 days, he would report it to his master. His master was currently in seclusion to recover. It wouldn't be good if there were too many things that made him worry. Just as he was pondering, the sound transmission talisman at his waist lit up. Layers of light gold flowed on it, extremely beautiful. Yellow Jing and almost jumped up. Damn it! There were too many things today and he forgot to report it to his master. He hurriedly connected the sound transmission talisman. Before the ancestor could speak, he had already spilled the beans. Master, Miss Ning finally left that small broken city today. She seems to be heading towards Phoenix City. Her complexion looks pretty good. Before she left, she even greeted the shop owner and gave him more than 10 taels of silver. Since last night, she didn't ask for bathing water that often and didn't walk around the house often. She should have slept all the way until dawn. Blah, 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 Yellow Jing and spoke for 3 whole minutes. In the end, he had nothing to say. The ancestor's question didn't come from the sound-transmitting talisman. If it wasn't still lit up, Yellow Jing and would have thought that the other side had already hung up. Master. Yellow Jing and called out tentatively. It seems. The person on the other side finally spat out 2 words. Yellow Jing and reacted for a long while before finally understanding where the word master referred to. He hurriedly said, Miss Ning left on her sword. The disciple following her doesn't know the art of sword manipulation and can only make a rough guess based on the direction she went. But disciple has already sent other disciples who know the art of sword manipulation. They should be able to catch up to her very quickly and won't let anything happen to her. The leaders and disciples of the other sects have also secretly informed them not to make things difficult for Miss Ning. The voice on the other end was indifferent. Did I say I was protecting her? I just want you to pay attention to her every move. Is there any news from Shuilon? No. This person seems to have completely disappeared. From beginning to end, he hasn't appeared. Disciple has also sent Hall Master Lin to the Demon Realm to investigate. The Demon Realm has become a pile of loose sand these past 10 years. It's very chaotic. Many people of the Demon Dao are also looking for him. They probably want him to return and preside over the situation. Chapter 1457. Yellow Jing and paused for a moment before continuing. Some people guessed that he was probably heavily injured somewhere and went into hiding to recuperate. The people of the demon world said that he always had this problem. Once he was heavily injured, he would definitely disappear. The overlord was silent for a moment before asking, who's following Ningxuama now? Yellow Jing and was stunned. He didn't expect the overlord to ask such details. After pausing for a moment, he didn't dare to hide anything. It's Hellion Shao. His martial arts have already reached Earth Rank 8. He's bold and careful. Yellow Jing An's heart was burning with a small flame. Master wouldn't be jealous, right? He wouldn't be jealous, right? If Master got angry, then he would immediately call that boy back to prevent him from becoming Master's cannon fodder. He held his little heart and waited for a long time. The sound transmission talisman was extinguished. Master directly hung up, so Master wasn't jealous. He wouldn't blame Helian Xiao that boy. Yilu Jing and heaved a sigh of relief, but at the same time, a trace of doubt arose in his heart. Was he wrong about the direction he had guessed? Master actually didn't care about junior sister, but really treated her as a demon and followed her. Afraid that she would harm this world. Sending people to follow her was actually to guard against her. Master's thoughts were so hard to guess. Also, what did Master think of Lizine? Ever since the lightning tribulation, Master never took the initiative to ask about Lizine's injuries. He didn't even ask about her whereabouts. It was as if he had already thrown it aside and didn't ask about it anymore. As a result, Yilu Jing and tried his best not to wander around Lizine's courtyard. He still sent 2 disciples to serve her as usual. Originally, he would occasionally go there to see if she was lacking or if someone bullied her. But these few days, he didn't want to go anymore. He didn't want her to beat around the bush and ask if Master had asked about her injuries. It would make it seem like he was keeping her in suspense. Yilu Jing and felt his head hurt even more. He had always been good at understanding others and was used to figuring out people's thoughts. But when he met Master who didn't reveal anything, he also felt powerless and lost. Helian Xiao was lost. Helian Xiao didn't know how many places he had explored in his life. He even went back and forth from the most famous maze a few times and could quickly find his way out. But now, he was lost. He was originally rushing forward like a spark, wishing he could reach Ning Xuema's side in one step and protect her from harm in the dark. His imperial sword technique was already very advanced. He flew in the air like a shooting star across the sky. In just a moment, he had traveled dozens of miles. He was familiar with this route, so he didn't expect that he would lose track of the coordinates after being distracted for a moment during the flight. White clouds filled the sky, floating clouds filled the sky. Above his head, below his feet, to his left, and to his right, it was as if he was lost in a boundless sea of clouds, unable to distinguish north from south. He didn't even know if he was standing or upside down. What was going on? Did I run into a ghost? But wasn't this ghost too clever? To actually be able to set up such a bewildering array in the sky. Helian Xiao paused for a moment, but he wasn't that nervous. He had learned a lot of ways to dispel this kind of sorcery in the Sun-Moon sect. Ghostly Labyrinth was a piece of cake for him. It wasn't even worth mentioning. He chuckled. Which bastard dares to trap me? I'll let you know how powerful I am. I'll pull you out and tear you into pieces. Chapter 1458. As he threatened, he used the spell to break the ghost wall. After a while, the white cloud was still the same white cloud, and he was still in the sea of clouds. He did not give up and used many other methods, but they were still ineffective. Was the ghost wall so powerful? What kind of kid set it up? He must have become a ghost immortal. Helian Xiao made up his mind and gave up on the spell. He stopped flying on the sword and let his body fall freely. He did not believe that he could not land on the ground. At most, he would feel dizzy, but it was still better than being trapped here. Hungry. Starving to death. Ning Xuemon never thought that she would be so hungry one day. The little guy in her stomach was tossing and turning, as if it was crying that it was hungry. It wanted to eat. Was this the legendary quarrel? Ning Xuemon flew forward faster while comforting the little baby in her stomach. Don't make a fuss, I will give you something to eat later. Let's eat chicken, duck, fish, and many other delicacies. She was so hungry that her hands were trembling and her legs were weak. After flying for a while, she almost could not control the sword anymore. She lowered her head and looked down. It was a boundless mountain range, but she didn't see any sign of a city. If she knew that she would be so hungry, she would have endured the nausea and eaten the food sent by the inn-owner. She sighed and looked down again. Suddenly, she had an idea. She would not be able to reach the city in a short time. She might as well go to the mountain below to hunt some rabbits and roast them to satisfy her hunger. When she thought of roasted rabbits, the little baby in her stomach tossed and turned even more, as if it wanted to eat meat. As for Ning Xuemo, she had the desire to catch a rabbit and skin it alive. Damn! No wonder when she was in the modern world, she saw some news saying that when some pregnant women wanted to eat something, they would be especially hungry. If they could not eat it, they would throw all kinds of tantrums, causing their husbands to cross half of the city in the middle of the night to find the delicacies that their wives wanted to eat. When she saw such news, she snorted and thought that most of those women were pretentious and wanted to test how much their husbands doted on them. Now she finally knew that it was not pretentious. It was real hunger and craving. The combination of these two feelings even made her a little flustered. She took a deep breath and was about to rush down when a large cloud suddenly flew in front of her. She was caught off guard and plunged into the cloud. A moment later, she stood still. She was surrounded by cotton-like clouds that floated up, down, left, and right, causing her to lose her sense of direction. After Ning Xuemo flew through the sea of clouds for a while, she understood that she had encountered something similar to a ghost labyrinth. There were only 3 kinds of people who could set this up in the sky. It was a great demon that had cultivated for a long period of time. Its power was at least a few thousand years. The powerful devils of the devil realm. There were also those who had reached Earth Realm level 9 in the immortal cultivation world. She even had the title of Demon Emperor. There were devils in the devil world who wanted to kill her and usurp the throne. Those in the immortal cultivation world also wanted to get rid of her as soon as possible. As for demons, the demon probably also wanted to catch someone with her skills and eat her. Therefore, all 3 scenarios were possible. Before the person behind the scenes came out, Ning Xuemo didn't want to waste her brain cells to make wild guesses. Therefore, she directly used magic to crack it. This time, she did not use the method that Shinjiuli had taught her. Instead, she used the method that Hua Baoyue had taught her when she communicated with him in the modern world. That day, when Hua Baoyue knew that she practiced magic, he was very curious and pestered her to show him a few kinds of magic.